Hey Brian, how you doing, my brother?
Pretty good, Scott. How you doing? Good to see you.
Oh man, doing okay, doing okay. Just been a busy weekend for me, relocating and so forth. So just a bit tired, and then there's a big thunderstorm in the area, so we may have to cut off. We're going to see how the weather goes, but so far so good. So I'm hoping at least we can get some time in to discuss things and maybe get some callers in to make it interesting. And I want to talk about. We both like to talk about religion, anyways. And yeah, we can definitely kick that conversation off, and let's see if anybody wants to join in and give us a call. I'll put the invite code into the comment section.
1 second, I'm gonna check my light here.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, man. Oh, is that a little better?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking kind of spooky there.
Yeah, it's a little bit bright, but
A little bit
a
bright.
lot better.
There you
That's
go.
for sure.
I don't want to
That'd
scare
be
any Christians
cool.
off looking
Yeah, don't scare the Christians off,
all
man.
evil.
You know.
God bless me. Oh, Jesus Christ. So you got the code up?
Yep, got the code up, and I'm just getting a video together. Did you see that discussion between Bill Maher and Jordan Peterson?
Ooh, no, I did not.
Yeah, they were talking about religion, and that was pretty interesting. Um, and I think how Bill Maher's an atheist, and Jordan Peterson, apparently he's a theist of some kind, but I just don't understand what kind of theist he is. I don't know if he takes God literally or what.
I think it's kind of come out that he's really a Christian. He
Yeah,
just doesn't he
really
just doesn't want to admit it.
doesn't want to admit it. Right, right, right. That makes sense. Um, let's see. We're going to share screen.
Jordan Peterson.
Peterson. He's just got
Yeah,
a very strange, or a different sort of take on religion than what maybe me and you are sort of familiar with, because mainly we deal with literalists and young earth creationist types and presuppositionalists, and that whole flavor. And Jordan Peterson makes the case of the Bible being an analogy and God being the future, basically your future, not a old man in the sky.
right.
So I don't know. He's got a different sort of take on it, and it's interesting watching the conversation between Bill Maher, because I guess he's coming at religion from a literalist's point of view and thinks the whole thing about the Bible and religion is just silly, whereas Jordan Peterson is trying to put a spin on that. And we'll take a listen to what I'm talking about so you'll know what I mean. But here we go. Let me know if it sounds okay to you.
There's a very interesting idea that lurks
You
behind
hear
the
it okay?
notion that you can establish a covenant
Sounds
with
good.
God. And the
Well, I mean, the Bible is so well known, even by people who haven't read it. And by the way, a lot of the people who put their hand on it and love it so much have never read it. Certainly not all the way through. It's a big, long book,
yes, it is.
and it's full of mostly nonsense. Once in a while, it stumbles upon wisdom. I mean, but come on, you got to give these people their due. I mean, it was written as, first of all, it's an anthology.
I'm going to tell you a story.
Okay. A
Tell me
Bible
what you
story.
think about Bible story. I mean, this is Jordan
I
Peterson's
love your Bible stories.
Okay, this is a Bible story. So I've been looking at the story of Jonah.
Yeah.
And this is a story that you'll appreciate. So here's what happens to Jonah. He's just minding his own business, and then the voice of God comes to him, and the voice says, "You have to go to this city, Nineveh, because everybody in Nineveh is like, they've strayed off the path, and I'm thinking about wiping them out. But you could maybe go there and tell them like how foolish they are, and they'll straighten up, and then I won't have to destroy the city. And Jonah thinks, there's no goddamn way I'm going to do that. First of all, Nineveh is a city of his enemies.
Babylonia.
It's a city that he's not allied with, and so he thinks, well, you guys can go to hell in a handbasket, and if God wipes you out, that's perfectly fine with me.
Right.
And then he also thinks, like any wise man would, it's like, I see, this is the task you have for me. It's like, there's 150,000 people there. I'm a foreigner. I'm going to go there and tell them how they're misbehaving, and that's going to work out well for me. So he thinks, to hell with that, like any sensible person would. And he doesn't say what he has to say, right? So then he hops on a boat and he gets the hell out of there. Well, it turns out that God's not very happy if you're informed that you have something to say and then you don't say it. So the storms come and the waves rise, and now the ship's in danger. Okay, so what does that mean?
Got in the whale.
Yes, that's right. It means that if you don't say what you have to say when you're called upon to say it, you'll put the whole damn ship at risk. Now, the soldiers figure this out, or the sailors, they figure out, there must be someone on boat that like isn't right with God, and that's why we're in danger of being swamped. So they will go and ask everybody, and Jonah, to his credit, says, yeah, it's me. You know, I had the voice of conscience made itself manifest to me. I had a task to do. I refused it. I'm screwing things up.
Okay. So far, you see the kind of interpretation he's putting on the scripture.
Yeah, he's telling a good story, and I think that's his thing. He's looking for those analogies, you know, and which makes a lot more sense than a literalist. You know?
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, for that part, I would much rather be inclined to see the sensibleness in looking at the Bible as just a collection of stories that are there to teach an analogous story, you know, or moral, you know. That makes sense, and that's something I can go along with if the moral is truly moral.
That's the problem. They're not all truly moral.
They're not usually that moral, are they?
And the sailors actually try to save him, but it doesn't work, so they throw him overboard. Now you think, okay, Jonah's got what he deserves because he shut the hell up when he had something to say, and now he's going to die. And you think that's pretty damn rough. And partly what that means is if you hold your tongue when you have something to say, then you're going to put the ship at risk, and you'll be lucky if you don't die. All right, but that's not enough. That's not nearly enough, because that isn't all that happens if you don't say what you're called upon to say. So the next thing that happens is Jonah's drowning away. That's about as bad as it gets. And then this creature from hell itself comes up from the bottom of the abyss and takes him down. And so now he's in hell for 3 days. And so that's the next part of the story, which is that if you're called upon to say what you have to say and you refuse it, like, you'll end up in a place where you wish you were dead.
Wait, not the whale?
It's the whale.
Oh, okay.
But it's the same thing. Like, that in the story, the whale is described as hell. It's exactly the same idea.
In Religulous, the guy who was arguing with me, and he said, this point was very important to him. He said, the Bible does not say whale. It says big fish. Okay, well, now it makes perfect sense.
Have you ever had that?
I've had that all the time. That makes all the difference. It's a fish, not a whale.
Yeah, like, come on, man. Like, you really think that makes a difference?
Any difference?
I never understood that argument point. I mean, but yeah, you know, and it's kind of weird. He kind of is making a little sense, because even the Christians who went back and reinterpreted the death of Christ and resurrection and preaching to the demons and, you know, spreading the word, you know, throughout the earth, you know, through his disciples. It was kind of like using Jonah as a foreshadow, you know, 3 days, 3 nights in the belly of the whale, you know, in the belly of the whale. It's kind of like 3 days in the grave, which is hell. That's Sheol, or Hades, as they, you know, translated it in Greek. So being, you know, the hell thing that Jordan Peterson was talking about kind of does make sense, at least from a Christian perspective, you know.
I don't know. It seems to me he's kind of even trying to secularize the story.
Yeah.
You know, it's not so much a Christian, you know, God told you this, but he keeps saying, if you have something you have to say, or
Hmm.
you have something to say, you need to say it.
Yeah.
And I,
And then you
I
go
think
through
that's what
hell
he's
when you
trying to.
don't. Yeah.
Exactly.
You go
Exactly.
through hell when you don't do that. Right.
And that's something he does quite a bit.
Yeah, he does that. And that's what I'm saying. And I don't think Bill Maher is familiar with that sort of angle, but let's check it out.
We'll see.
Yeah, well, it's the thing. Well, what it is, it's a representation of the thing that dwells in the darkness.
It's so interesting that you see the lessons in these, and I just always read these things as like super fucking stupid from the Bronze Age, and obviously they were telling people something. I mean, whoever wrote this had a message in mind.
Well, they were trying to They were trying to figure out by telling stories how the state itself got corrupted. And this is one of those stories. So the story is, here's how the state gets corrupted. You're called upon to tell your fellow man, enemy or not, when they're not behaving properly. When your conscience tells you to do that, you're called upon to do that. If you don't do that, the whole ship will start to rock.
But do you think the ancients who were reading this at the time, and they read the story about he gets swallowed by the big fish or the whale, you think they got this message? They were like, yeah, but what this really means is when you're called upon, excuse me, I'm talking, when you're called upon, then you step up and do it.
No, I would say it's a step, and it's a dreamlike step in the developing of understanding. So before you fully understand something, you can represent it in a story. Right? It's kind of halfway. A kid who starts to understand something by acting it out.
They may. I mean, they may have gotten it, or they may have gotten it on an unconscious level. Right?
They got it at an implicit level,
which is what you.
Level. Yeah, well, that's what you get when you watch a story. Is you get it at an implicit level, and it's actually very powerful, right? I mean, when people go to movies, most of the time, most people when they go to movies don't sit around afterwards and discuss what the movie meant. They just enjoy the story.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they didn't learn anything. It just means they don't reflect on what they learned.
What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think he's partially right. They definitely had a deeper meaning, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the meaning that he's attaching to it.
Right.
His center really these days is politics, and he's trying to bring it into like a political situation.
Oh,
but a lot of these myths like this can be applied like that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. But whether that's what it really meant, you're kind of unsure about that.
Yeah, I doubt that's exactly what it meant.
It'd be interesting to talk to Josh Bowen about that because he had kind of told me the same thing one time. We were doing a show, and he said, like, he goes, a lot of these stories weren't even, he said, the ironic thing is a lot of these stories in the Old Testament weren't even meant to be literal, because that's how people expressed ideas even in other cultures outside of the Hebrew culture. Like, that's just how they did it. They usually expressed ideas through analogies and even in parables.
Oh, sure.
And so he was, but it'd be interesting to see what his take would be on the Jonah story.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I can kind of understand what he's saying. Like, like you said, he tends to make, at least Jordan Peterson may tend to make things really politicize things. And I'm thinking about the Jewish nation, like Israel at the time. It isn't like you had a separation between church and state. Back then, the religion was the state. It was a theocracy, right? So maybe these things that are taught in the Bible, these stories, actually are expressions of the idea of what the state should be doing. Or
I'm sure there's,
like I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of that. Especially when you get into like those type of books. But I doubt that they really thought that the Jonah story was literal.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They were obviously trying to express some other message.
Right.
And you're right. And that's, most of the Old Testament's like that.
Mm-hmm.
And like I say, it's not, I mean, it's not something exclusive to the Hebrews. Like you said, all over the world.
Yeah, the Egyptians, everybody.
Grimm's fairy tales.
Yeah, that's right.
They all have a good message.
Interesting.
Now, the people who came up with these stories, they were telling the stories because the stories were really interesting. But the question, there's a deeper question, is, well, why the hell was that story interesting, and why was it remembered? And so, what happens to Jonah is that he's in the whale for 3 days, and then he thinks, now I'm in hell. Okay, I'm gonna repent of my inadequacy. I'm willing to say what I have to say. So the whale spits him up on the beach. Then he goes to Nineveh and he tells everybody what the hell they're doing wrong, and God decides to spare the city. And so for me, this story encapsulates.
It's a win-win.
It's a little hard on Jonah. There's the whole hell thing. He does. He lived. That's right. It was a rebirth story.
Did he relocate to Nineveh?
No, it's just a pilgrimage to Nineveh.
Oh, okay. So he did. Okay.
But he goes there, and then the city is in fact saved. But it's perfect, Bill, because what it shows, and I know you know this because you wouldn't speak the way you speak, and this is true of comedians in general. You know that you have a moral obligation, like a deep and profound moral obligation.
I do.
To say what you have to say. And,
you're right.
Well, then you might say, well, what would happen if people didn't say that? Well, that's the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. If there isn't anyone who's left who is good and will tell the truth, then the whole city disappears. And the same thing happens in the story of Jonah. So there's a very interesting idea that lurks behind the notion that you can establish a covenant with God, and you can tell me what you make of this. It's like it's a reflection of the fact that human beings bargain with fate all the time. We bargain with the future all the time. So and here's how we do it. So, and this is what you teach your kids. You teach your kids that if you forego immediate gratification, so you give it up, sacrifice it, because that's a sacrifice, that the future will be better as a consequence. Well, that's okay. It's a contractual relate. Well, that's what's trying. Right. That's the thing that's so interesting, is that it actually will.
If you don't have that piece of cake tonight, you'll be healthier tomorrow.
Right. And if you don't go off and play with your friends immediately after school, but play the piano for 20 minutes, then in 10 years when you're actually a musician, all sorts of okay. But it's, see, this is something that's very uniquely human, because human beings have learned that if we give up, there are certain forms of immediate gratification. If we give them up, which means we offer them up, it's a sacrificial offering, then we can make a covenant, a bargain with the future. Right. That's what's being reflected in those stories, where the notion is that you can bargain.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he stretched the point a little bit there.
Yeah. And it's kind of like looking at the Bible as a living document. Kind of like we can change the kind of like the Universalists do, and other progressive liberal Christianity might do, is they'll say, well, that interpretation worked for people 2,000 years ago, but that interpretation doesn't work for us in today's world. So it's okay to reinterpret the Bible, and I think that's kind of the strength of Christianity's survival. There's a built-in mechanism that allows the religion to kind of bend to the cultures for which it's exist in. It's a conversion process, which entails like taking on culture and customs, and be all things to all people, so to speak. And even today, in most churches, they'll officiate gay marriages. Most Christians accept evolution now. Most Christians believe in the Big Bang. There's a lot of things that maybe at one time, like, they believed the earth was flat and, we were the center of the universe. Christianity somehow adapted to the times whenever things changed or paradigms shifted.
I'm old enough to remember when you couldn't get divorced in the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
Times have changed, and but I think that's really true. The malleability of it really probably accounts for a lot of its longevity, no doubt.
Do you think, because I was discussing this on another show that I frequent a lot, like I'm usually a guest, at the show, and Skeptic Haven. Shout out to those guys, and shout out to Wes and Joshua and everybody over there. Shout out, guys. But we used to discuss things like, the direction that atheism should take as an organization, like organizing around it. And my point was that, you know, we have to be malleable too, because a lot of the stuff we discuss and we get into all sorts of political issues and, different worldviews and things of that nature, like the belief of ghosts, souls, other things that are maybe connected to the whole God question or God conversation, but aren't necessarily tied to a belief in God. Like there's a lot of atheists that believe all sorts of weird stuff. And so I was trying to make the point that, there's a difference between atheism and skepticism. Like you can be an
Well,
atheist and
yeah,
not be skeptical at all. You're just skeptical on that one particular thing. And even your arguments may be all wrong.
yeah,
It's just you
yeah,
don't want to believe in God for whatever
right,
reason, or you don't have good reasons for why you rejected the idea. Could be a lot of people are just angry at the church. Maybe they've been through it. Um, but I guess my point is that, you know, it's kind of good to just understand that you can work within a system to change it. Like Christianity, you know, suppose that if that was the new church's direction, like imagine the Jordan Peterson interpretation of Christianity or whatever, we wouldn't be having the same problems with it as we do now, right? But then what
exactly.
would those
Right.
problems be, do you think you can imagine? Or even should it be a problem? What do you think?
I don't know if you could get to that kind of point, probably wouldn't have a whole lot of problems.
Yeah.
Like if the Unitarians were the major Christian group in the world, Christianity wouldn't be a big problem.
Right, right.
It's more the fundamentalist, that cause all the problems.
Yeah, it's kind of like I didn't know a whole lot about Buddhism a few years ago, but I used to work and I had a workmate, a co-worker that was a Buddhist priest, and we used to always discuss religion, and I always came at it from a very skeptical point of view, and he could never understand what my points were, because he would always be like, well, why are you projecting those sort of critiques onto me? Because it sounds like you mainly have a problem with the Abrahamic type religions. And I could never understood what he was trying to say, because I always kind of put everybody in the same
Uh,
category, you know what I mean? And he was like, I was like, yeah, but how do you know there's a God? Blah 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 blah. And he's like, I don't believe in God. Like, what are you talking about? Like,
right.
and it just really kind of blew my. It was like mind blower. And then I'm like, well, yeah, but what about souls? And I don't believe, in souls. I believe in anatta. I'm like, well, what is that? And he was just described pretty much the same ways that I
Same
would
thing.
believe. So I think, yeah, it was kind of hard for me to find some kind of problem I could, discuss with him. And it, and then I started thinking, well, if Christianity was to evolve like into this Jordan Peterson sort of, interpretation, then it kind of turns into kind of like that, more of a
Exactly.
philosophy or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
The supernatural stuff.
Kind of let it fade to the background a little bit. And I don't even have that much problem with the supernaturalism, except they want to force it on everybody.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah, yeah,
know,
yeah. Right.
it's like I've got I'm down here in Texas. Most everybody I know are Christians.
Mm-hmm.
We don't talk about it. They don't talk about it.
Right.
Half my friends are liberal, half my friends are conservative. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not trying to enforce a bunch of laws based on Christianity.
That's the point. Yeah, that's the more important thing.
And I guess we started talking about like the atheist community, and that's basically I used to be kind of involved in the local atheist community, and it's more of a political organization, and
Hmm.
I think that's what kind of holds everybody together. You got people that people believe in souls, and people believe in spirits, and you had liberals and communists and what am I trying to say? Yeah, Ann Randy's.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, the libertarian.
Libertarians didn't have any conservatives, but broad spectrum. But everybody could agree that we wanted some religious freedom.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
and I
That's
guess
right.
we had common enemies. I guess.
So you had
But
mentioned that you were talking to Muslims sometime this week, and what was that conversation about? I'm interested to hear a little bit about that.
not a whole lot. I'm on one group, and it's run by Muslims, but there's atheists, Christians, but man, I hope they're listening. I hope they come in. They keep kicking me out of there.
Really?
Uh, yeah, really. I mean, these guys have no arguments. I mean, I don't want to be just totally disrespectful out here, but the Muslims that I come across, they have zero argument. I mean, Christians make them look like geniuses,
Hmm. I
and
know.
it's just the Quran is true, and that's it. End
Yeah,
of story. You know, that's it.
and it's so funny.
And it's like,
From stuff I've heard, they really boast themselves on the fact that Christianity leads to atheism. I've heard a lot of that
yeah,
stuff from Muslims because they say that you guys don't use your brains. You believe in trinities and um, some you try to say that God is one God, but yet He's three gods. So you're polytheistic and you're in denial. So there's so much problems. And then about the Jesus thing, they're like, Jesus didn't resurrect, and he didn't. There's no evidence for that, and
you know,
it's just really
it's
interesting.
it's kind of funny because that's a real common thing. They really get down on the Trinity. Yeah, you people are you're worshiping false gods, you're worshiping a man, idolatry, and all this.
Hmm.
But then when they talk about Jesus, that he didn't die. He was. They have the swoon theory. He didn't quite die, and they took
Hmm.
him to the tomb, and then they took him out of the tomb, and he's still alive. Or you've got some of them that say they switched him at the last second. But
Right.
however it is, and it's like that kind of historical case. That's just silly. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean I guess it's more likely than an actual resurrection, but still,
Right. But and it's really weird about Muslims too is that they believe in Jesus as a prophet.
right?
You know, and they're like, when did Jesus ever say that he was God? Where in the show me in the Bible where Jesus claimed to be God, and then usually Christians will go to Revelations where Jesus says, "I come with a sword, for I am the Almighty." And then the Christian will say, "So who is the Almighty? Is Almighty God?" And it's like, "Yes, God." Well, there you have it. So, and then they'll
Oh yeah,
go, and the Christian will bring up, something like Surah, what is it, 29:9, that says, you know, fight your enemies. Anyone who doesn't believe in Islam as the true religion, fight them, fight them, fight them until they submit. And so Jesus said that I am the way, the truth, and the life. Only you can only go to God through me. So there's a big problem there. So I don't understand why you know Muslims would take Jesus on as a prophet because a prophet doesn't lie. You know, and yet the claims of Christianity is that Jesus is salvation. You know.
right. Well, but the Muslims, say the New Testament is all corrupt.
Hmm.
Same thing with the Old Testament. All of that, everything the Jews said,
Mm.
God came down, gave the word to the Jews. The Jews were such bad people; they corrupted the word. So God
Hmm.
sent Jesus as a prophet, and sent his word, and then the Jews were still so corrupt that they corrupted that and turned him into a god.
Mm.
And both of those are corrupt. Just what we take, and that's how they built their religion. It's half Judaism, half Christianity.
Cherry
Threw
picking,
all
yeah.
that shit together. Yeah, cherry picked it, threw all that together, and had their own little thing going.
Right.
But that's what doesn't make sense to me. Okay, they insist the Quran is the true, inerrant, perfect word of God.
Mm-hmm.
But they also admit that God can send down his word and it can be corrupted by man.
Right.
Right? It's
Right.
already happened twice, according to them.
Right.
So then why should I believe the Quran?
Right. Good point. Very
I,
good point.
I've never understood that. But
Yeah. It's interesting. The religion is really strange, and it's mainly with the Abrahamic religions. I mean, there's
well,
Hinduism that they worship a myriad of gods, and I'd like to say that maybe they don't take those gods literally. They're more like caricatures of certain things in nature, but not always. I mean, there's different
not always.
versions of Hinduism, and
Yep.
different ways. I mean, they've got temples for the monkey gods and millions of gods or whatever. It's really
And like I said, you got so many different versions of Hinduism. In most of those, those aren't really gods. What do
yeah,
they call them? Demigods.
yeah,
You know, in,
demigods and
right? Minor gods, that kind of thing. But
hmm yeah, and but the and the when you look into history and even currently, you see the strife and hatred that this religion spawn up. This whole thing. They take this stuff so serious, and I think the impetus or the power behind it is just this fear. This fear of their particular gods, and and because there's also on the other side, there's this big hope involved. That the religion gives people. The afterlife, and it's just interesting to see how powerful that plays on the human psyche.
yeah,
To make
without a
you
doubt.
willing to kill children and burn people alive, and it's just crazy.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. Nothing compared. Even government, can't drive people as hard as religion does.
Right.
But I mean, it's a survival mechanism, for humankind. Um,
Hmm.
as far as I'm concerned, I'm a naturalist, and anything that's that ubiquitous has to have some kind of strong evolutionary purpose.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so have
Type
we
one,
outgrown
type
that
two
purpose yet or
errors.
not?
Hmm. We were kind of discussing that a few weeks ago about the type one, type two errors
Exactly.
that evolution gives us as in all species as a way of surviving. Like we tell our brain creates stories about the world around us, and we sort of build our perceptual reality around it, and we sort of project it out there because it works. It's kind of helped us to survive and procreate and all of that. But that should also give us pause and say, well, we should really start looking for tools to help us to overcome illusions and delusions that come quite naturally, since we know that. And so we have tools of science, um, epistemology, philosophy gives us a lot of tools that we use for, laws of thinking, logic, those sort of things. And, um, but people want to really feel, that they're secure,
Exactly.
that their afterlife is secure, that, you know, that, that, they have explanations for things. It's really a powerful thing in the human psyche, and it's like you said, it comes from natural reasons.
So the question is, I mean, are we ready? Have we outgrown that or not? And I'm afraid we
Right.
haven't.
Right.
We're
Right.
just at the cusp of it.
Yeah, I mean,
You know,
and you can kind of see the point with some religious people when they say, atheists like to make fun of us for magical thinking and this and that. But look at you guys. You guys are just humans too. If what you're saying is correct, then you're also probably basing your beliefs on, a lot of illusions and things of that nature. It's just that they think that their explanations actually do the heavy lifting for them, whereas ours just kind of is weak and pointless and arbitrary. And it's like, no, critical thinking, sound epistemology, logic, those are tools that help us that will help us transcend magical thinking and things of that nature. I mean, it's the best we can do, and it's worked for us. That's why we have science and things that have really helped change the world.
that's the thing that kind of gets me when they're like, yeah, well, science doesn't know anything, and science has been wrong so much. Friggin' science is the most successful method of knowing we've ever had.
Hmm.
We have built the greatest civilization in the entire history of the world thanks to science,
Hmm.
to methodological naturalism.
Right.
We found a way to discern imagination from reality,
That's right.
and it works.
That's right.
And the
That's
religious
why we
don't
have
like it
technique.
because
Yeah.
you point that to the religion, and they don't always hold up so well.
And it's interesting. Some Christians and Muslims will say, well, science is the child of our religion. Like they'll say that, um, without Christianity, you wouldn't have science. All scientists were Christians. We gave you science. It's the natural philosophers. The church said, let us handle the spiritual side of reality. And you natural philosophers, you study the natural side of reality. And so there's two boxes of reality. Um, and sometimes that's the argument. Or some people will straight up tell you, and someone told me last week that science is of the devil. Science is of the devil.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what I was
you
told. Seriously. And I'm like, because science can never explain what came before the Big Bang. You could talk about the bit like, well, science right now, science deals with what it can figure out.
right.
And it's like it talks about how the universe works, and it's assisted us in developing technology and medicine and everything that you use. But it's not metaphysics. You're talking about metaphysics. That's something totally that's beyond science, beyond physics, and that's philosophy and things like that. But science is not what you think it is. Like they project religion, like they think
Right.
science
Well,
is a religion. Like, oh, you guys changed your mind, see, over time. So that shows you guys are full of lies.
right. Not that we learn things and we keep learning things, right? But that gets back. That's the fundamentalist. Because science doesn't say anything about God in general
Hmm.
or any of the metaphysics, but it does pretty much tell us that the Abrahamic story is a bunch of crap.
Yeah, it really does. I mean,
That's
in
the
my
problem.
opinion.
It's their particular God. If you want to take that literalist position, science pretty much blows that away.
Hmm.
The Earth is not 6,000 years old. We evolved from simpler, organisms. You know, that's that. And then you've got archaeology. I've been really, kind of delving into that more, and
Hmm.
there is no way that the Hebrews or Israelites were slaves in Egypt, left Egypt by the millions, went into Canaan and slaughtered a bunch of people and took over, because that's not
That's
how
right.
it happened.
It's not how it happened.
You know,
And they're in denial. They just, they cherry pick the science. Um, they use science when it
when it's
seems to
convenient,
bolster their case, archaeology and even everything like that, history. Oh yeah, King David was a person. There's inscriptions and there's old camps that are 3,000 years old that they found that coincide with this and that. It's like, okay, great. But then when it
What-
comes to topics like the Exodus out of Egypt or Adam and Eve or other things, the Tower of Babel, things like that, they're just not going to, look at the science, what science has to say about them, or history and archaeology has to say about those things more specifically.
Right. And the same thing, like, I don't know, I've been on some young earth creationist sites lately too. And, the way they have to deny every last bit of science. If you're going to say the earth is 6,000 years old and we never evolved, I mean, that's cosmology, astronomy, radiology, geology, paleontology, genetics. I mean, every field of science, you just have to say, well, they're wrong.
Hmm.
How can you even hold that position?
I don't know. There's, I think Joe Rogan was doing an interview with a intelligent design uh, scientist. And let me see if I can find a little skit, a little short part of that. See what he has to say. Yeah,
The
really.
intelligent design guys are a little more slick, because
Mhm.
they don't always deny the age of the earth or evolution even.
Exactly.
Just that God had to do a little bit here and there, right?
Yeah, and they use sciencey words.
Hmm.
They want to use the sciencey words, and that sort of is their way of, I always say, helping people believe stupid shit, without feeling stupid.
Right.
Anyways, here's this guy.
Well, let's see.
See what he's got to say here.
An ultimate fine tuner stands.
Say that last sentence again.
Okay.
Just the last sentence about the
Given that fine tuning in our experience
yes.
is always the product of intelligence.
Right.
Think of any system we would describe as finely tuned.
Right.
Then, and given that the multiverse has not provided an explanation for the ultimate fine tuning,
Yeah.
the best explanation remains intelligent design. And if you want to say yet, that's fine, because again, all scientific arguments, whether they have theistic implications or not, are provisional.
Is it fine tuning based on our interpretations of what's happening? I mean, is Hawaii fine tuning? Is the volcanic eruption underneath the ocean that creates the island, is that fine tuning by intelligent design? Or is that a process of things that happen and then other living things take advantage of this process and use it as home?
I think.
And is that thought process possible in that particular, like that example, and then extrapolate that through the whole universe?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good thought. And there are processes that are at work and that I wouldn't want to make a design argument about. But I think there are deep and fundamental parameters of the universe, and I think of our planetary system that have these joint properties of extreme improbability that are working jointly to achieve some discernible functional end.
And what do you think that discernible functional end is, and what role do we play in that?
I think it's life. I think we play the role of perceiving life as having a significance that non-life does not have.
What do you think about that?
Well,
so
even Joe knows he's full of crap, right?
Yeah.
Oh, man, the fine tuning argument to me is the absolute worst.
Yes, it is.
I mean, Joe's got it right there, but you hear him saying, well, these processes were made to this end. Who says? Right? What do you mean?
How do you know that?
How do you know that?
How can we test for that?
The first thing he said was all processes that are finely tuned are from intelligence. Well, that's blatantly untrue.
Yeah.
I mean, our solar system's pretty well damn fine tuned, but you can't show me an intelligent designer anywhere there. It's all physics.
the whole idea of entropy, um, going from total order, and to have that total order, it's very simple. Intelligence is a very complex process. It's a process that requires, a lot of other combinations of properties in order for it to even, bootstrap itself. Um, but just going from what we know in science, which is a point of a singularity, well, that's the most simplest sort of property there can be. It's just one thing, and then out of that, expanded, the universe, and from there, evolution as a process of change took off, and life eventually evolves from that. It becomes possible for life, however we're defining it.
But what he's
And
going to try to say is that that initial condition had to be set up by some intelligence
yeah,
because
that,
it's so improbable. Well, you
right,
don't know how improbable it is.
well, if it takes intelligence in order for complexity to arise, then obviously the thing that created the complexity must be more complex than the thing created. So who
Who
created
created
God? Who created
exactly,
that complex being? Like,
exactly.
where did it just pop into existence from nothing, or did it always exist? And if whatever, however you answer that question, can be applied to the naturalistic, you know, thing. Why can't reality just always be eternal? Why can't the nature of reality be eternal? And
Exactly. I
um,
mean, at least we know it does exist.
at least we know, yeah,
You
because
know?
everything is a subset of
Yeah.
that. So you know, so yeah,
I
it's
don't.
interesting. But
I don't know if you've seen. I've been putting forth Alexander Vilenkin's argument, and he kind of
oh yeah,
proposes, that the laws of physics are fundamental.
hmm
That is reality, and then if you just make that one assumption, then you could have the laws of physics, the nature of reality could always have existed and would have inevitably spawned universes.
yes,
And then
exactly,
theists say, well, you can't prove that. Well, you can't prove God either, but I can prove that the laws of physics exist.
right,
I can at least show mathematically that it's possible. I don't need to speculate any other complex thing that just somehow happened to exist.
right. Yeah, it's building on things we know already, and those are the rules of engagement, even with the theists, or at least Christian creationists, intelligent design people. Is their whole argument is, they'll ask the question, well, what we know about reality is that everything that is created needed a creator. That's their premise. That everything that begins to exist had a cause. You know, and so, except for God, they'll make the special pleading case that except for their God, and then why can't we make the case that except for the laws of reality?
Exactly.
Why can't those always exist? And and you get different,
You get different
sort of
runarounds.
explanations. Some will be, well, there must be a mind behind laws because every law needs a lawmaker. It's like, how do you know that? Because we're falling back on what we know here. People create stop signs and go signs and yield signs and other laws to regulate traffic or regulate the court of law here. It needed a mind to develop these ideas, but they're conflating the how science uses laws and how we use laws. you know
Exactly. You
Science
can
is descriptive versus prescriptive.
right. You can break the laws of speed limit on the freeway, but you
Yeah,
can't break the law of the speed of light.
that's right. That's
It's
right. It's a
it's a totally
constant.
different
Yeah, the
concept.
constants of nature. Yeah, you can't break those. You know. Anyways, let's hear what else this guy has to tell us.
You could then argue, well, that's very subjective. Maybe life doesn't have that significance. But I think we come again and again to affirm that life has significance. The contrary view would be to say life has no significance. There's nothing significant in that outcome, and I don't think we actually believe that. So
why does it have to be no significance? I mean, it's significant. It's life. It's a thing, right? Just like water's significant. There's a lot of significant things.
Well, it
is finite. It comes and goes, and there's a lot of different forms of life. But no, I don't think anyone's suggesting that it's not significant. I mean, that word is a weird word.
Yeah, it's a weird word use. It's a discernible functional outcome that can be separated from all the other events in the universe on some qualitative criteria. Let me give you an illustration that might help explain the underlying rationale of the inference to design in this case. Let's imagine you're on the security duty at a bank, and you've suddenly been told that there's a robbery and a bank vault has been opened. So you go back and you look at the security footage, and there are two possibilities. You got some robber got in, and there are two possibilities. Either it was an inside job, and the robber had the code to open the vault, or it was just lucky random fiddling. Now, if you freeze the footage right before the robber puts his hand on the dial, if you're expecting, what would you expect if it was an inside job? Well, you would expect that the robber would go directly to the combination that would pop open the vault. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, it might be that he got incredibly lucky, but your overwhelming expectation based on your knowledge of the improbability of finding that combination is that the robber will crack the code and open the vault. On the random fiddling hypothesis, you'd expect that there would be a lot of tries, and actually you'd expect that the vault would never get opened. Okay, so instead, what you see when you run the footage is the robber went right to the combination; it popped open. Now, that combination of an incredibly improbable event that results in a remarkable or functional or significant outcome triggers an awareness that there was design. And that is probabilistically, it's a calculably more probable theory than the idea of random fiddling, because we know the odds against finding the combination. So the odds, because it's so incredibly improbable that the robber would find it, it's also incredibly unlikely that that's how it happened. Okay. Mm-hmm. So now we can say, well, why is it significant that the vault opened or not? We can say, well, but we know that there's something different about that event than the vault being closed. And it's the same thing. We know that there's something very different about life than a lifeless universe. And we know that finding our overwhelming expectation based on the improbability of getting all those parameters right is that if only natural processes had been at work, we would find one of those other combinations that would not open the lock, or AKA not result in life. So our expectation based on naturalism is a lifeless universe in light of what we know about the fine-tuning parameters. Our expectation based on theism, the inside job hypothesis, is that we would get something. We would get life. There would be something. It's certainly more probable on theism that we'd get life given the fine-tuning than it would be given naturalism, where our overwhelming expectation is we'd find one of those life unfriendly combinations. So there's some kind of second order probabilistic reasoning involved in this, but I think it's very commonsensical, but it can be unpacked with these sort of deeper.
Is this an egocentric perspective because we are alive? Is it our perspective of life being far more significant than other things in the universe, like the creation of suns? Is this thing that we have where we're attaching intelligent design to something that may just be a property of the universe itself?
we could say that, except that we know that fine tuning in our experience does result from mind. It's not just that we're interested
In our experience.
Yeah, in our experience.
But limited experience, right? And
right. But that, again, that is the basis of all scientific reasoning.
Right.
Right.
I understand,
So
but it's not a conclusion based on all the data that could possibly be available.
no, that would be to have that would be a certain proof.
Right.
Okay. And there's
Do you have in your mind, are you certain?
Am I certain? I have had experiences of God that make
Yep.
me more confident.
Wow. So yeah. So anyways, we have Sanford and Son. How you doing, man? Now, let me unmute you just a second.
Oh, it's
Hey,
been.
what happened? You done mute yourself, brother?
Got your mic on?
There you go. Can't hear you though, sir.
Turn the mic up. Get your mic.
Yep. But yeah,
Man, Joe was on it right there.
yeah, he got him good, and
Right.
he used the old experience, personal experience.
It always comes back to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you saw that with William Lane Craig,
Yep.
you know, with all his philosophical proofs and everything like that. It comes down to if there's a chance in a million, I'm going to believe it.
Yeah.
You know,
Wow. That's just such a lame argument.
I mean, really,
I mean, as a scientist, you would think that you would keep that kind of stuff out of the lab
right?
or out of your research. You know, you would want to definitely only stick with the evidence. I mean, you're not doing anyone a service, even your own, even people that are in your echo chamber. It's not helping them. They want to see evidence, you know, so they can use it against those evil atheists
Right.
who keep demanding that pesky old evidence, you know.
But I think you're right. You know, that kind of thing, you know, makes Christians feel like, you know, they're not dumb for believing in God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, give them some kind of pseudoscience to believe in, and they can feel a little smarter about it.
Yeah, and you know, an idea like God, whether it's true or not, it's just beside the point. The fact is that explanation is unfalsifiable, and if something is unfalsifiable, then there's no real value in it, in my opinion. You know, what's the value in believing something, committing yourself to a belief in something that you can never prove is wrong? Theoretic, like just there's you know, if something can't be proven wrong, then you know, then what's the point in believing it? Because you know, there's no way to prove it.
I can't get my microphone to work.
Oh,
Well,
I can hear
somehow
you.
you did.
Yeah, you did, because we can hear you now.
Oh, good. Okay, so I don't
How
know
you
if you're
doing,
still on.
Sanford?
How y'all doing tonight?
We're doing good.
Good.
Okay, I am too. Hey, so I'm arguing with somebody on your YouTube channel right now.
DM
About,
Turner. Yeah.
yeah, the silly thing about trying. What's that? Yeah, I wish he would. Yeah, I wish he would. Because this whole thing, you have to prove God doesn't exist, is bullshit. Proving that God doesn't exist is the same thing as proving that the boogeyman doesn't exist.
Right.
I mean, there's no life ever recorded to be known that can be proved that exists, that's supernatural in nature. That means not natural, not being born, and not dying. It's all bullshit. And the primitive humans I can understand. I mean, they didn't know any better, you know. But today's humans, I really think it comes down to narcissism. They really can't think. They can't accept the fact that one day they won't exist.
Right. Right. And some people just want to be right. I mean, some people have been raised in religion, whatever their religion is. You know, the culture is, in our culture, is going to be Christianity. And so, yeah, they're going to, because of peer pressure or whatever else, they're going to want to stick to their story to the very end. It's become part of their identity. And you refuting them, Sanford and Son, is like you destroying their identity. It's like you're
Yes,
attacking
yes,
them personally, and you're
yeah.
not attacking them personally. You're just giving your reasoning for why people don't believe in God, and they can't handle it. They cannot imagine somebody having a different experience than them about reality.
Yeah, and it goes on to okay, so I was a Christian for many years. As a matter of fact,
Mhm.
I was born and raised a Catholic, went to a Catholic school, really, really believed in God. Then I was like wondering, is my denomination the correct one? And then when I was in the service, I was in the military for 23 years. I got to meet a lot of different people from many different denominations, like all kinds. And we would get together and study the Bible, like whether it was Jehovah Witnesses or Worldwide Church of God, Church of Christ, Pentecostals, Baptists, you name it. So my desire at that time in my life, in my early 20s, was that I wanted to be right. I wanted to, like you were just saying there, Scott, I wanted to be right. I wanted to be in the right denomination. And so when I kept going in that direction, I finally realized, I had an epiphany, that it wasn't trying to find God that was so important. It was myself. What kind of person are you? Are you a
Right.
person that can never harm other life? Could you commit heinous acts against other humans or other life? And then I realized that I'm searching for something that really, it's all within yourself. So what I claim now, God was my alter ego, and maybe even if you're the more zeal you have, my super ego. And I think that's what a lot of these Christians, God has become their alter or super egos. And that's why, like you said, Scott, that's why, like you said, when you say anything about God, you're saying something about them.
That's right.
It's one and the same. And that's what it is right there.
And you see the comment just made by DM Turner saying calling it BS is just a cop out because atheists get frustrated they cannot evidence the non-existence of God. Well, here's the problem. It's just like you don't have to evidence the non-existence of the boogeyman or the tooth fairy either,
Exactly.
for the
Yes.
same reasons, because from where we sit, we're just not convinced that this God exists. You haven't really presented the evidence for it. And so we don't have to really take it serious. But for the Christian, their job is to convince people that their, Savior is God, Jesus Christ, and that we have to bow down to this God in order to be saved. But for me, I believe that a lot of that going in hand, and this is my opinion, because I used to be a Christian too many years ago. It's just as you said, it's an ego trip. It's you've got this super ego called Jesus Christ, who's this comic book hero that they identify with, and I'm on his team. I'm on Team Jesus, and so when you're attacking Jesus, you're attacking me, and I'm not going to
Yes.
let you do that.
And now, how look how it relates to politics. So who's the same now? Who's the Jesus of today in politics? These Christians, these evangelicals.
Right.
It's Trump.
I mean,
It's Trump. Now Trump is, you're attacking Trump. You're attacking them. He's the modern day Messiah.
Yeah. There's a host all over the world. There's a host of different leaders, and
Yes.
people worship others.
Yep.
They really have a need to idolize figures, not only just in politics but also in music and any other walk of life.
Yes.
And I guess it goes back to what Brian was saying. There, that sort of religious impulse that we all have evolutionarily. Last week we were kind of talking about some secular sort of religions, if you will, like this singularity movement, right? Where you have these Kurt Weil, what's his name? I forget. Kurzweil heads up the singularity movement, to where he's saying we're going to live forever, and our salvation is going to come in the form of artificial general intelligence, which is going to happen in the year 2035. And if you will get on board with that, then you will be saved and you'll live forever in the cloud like a heavenly bliss. And it becomes a secular religion. It goes into that wanting to have eternal life, wanting to have your ego live forever because it's so important that you live forever. Like, so it's that religious impulse.
Yeah. So when I was I was about like 4 or 5. Oh, wait a minute. Someone else. Wait, real quick. I was about 4 or 5 years old, maybe even 3. And I'll never forget, we were all in my sister's bedroom getting ready to go to sleep. And when I said about death, I can still remember this. I was 3 or 4 years old. And I remember my sister saying, yeah, one day you're not going to exist no more. And I remember crying my eyes out. Like, why? I was petrified of not living anymore. Like, I'm going to not exist. It hit home. So I think maybe that's why I was really zealous in my.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Coffee or caffee, hopefully I'm not chopping your name up.
Religious, being a Christian. So we got someone on board.
Yeah, we got someone on board.
I need a beer.
How you doing, sir?
Doing all
you
right.
unmute, sir.
Doing pretty good, man. Yeah, I love these kind of topics, man. I'm always interested in discussing religion, and I've heard that point a lot of times that it's just kind of like a comfort thing, consolation for people who fear death. But I've always been obsessed with people like mystics throughout the ages that they completely have no fear of death. So it kind of contradicts the idea that religion is just there. It's just something we prompted so that to quell our fear of death. Because I think in these very highly religious and spiritual people, there is no fear of death.
Right.
That's because they're going to live forever.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I don't understand why Christians are so, or even theists are so afraid of death. I mean, you're going to live forever.
Mm-hmm.
What's a little death to you?
Well, my interpretation has been that, the so-called, I'm very interested in like mystical experiences, and the mystical experience, if you want to cut it short to the most brief definition of it, I would say it is a glimpse of what a lot of people may see in the near-death experience, but you have it now, and you get to glimpse it in the midst of life, and you live to tell the tale. And I think in glimpsing that, I've even heard some people say of near-death experiences that once they've seen like what happens the moment prior to death, they no longer have anything to fear because they've already had the experience. What's there to fear if you already know what's going to happen?
So do you believe in the immortality of your soul?
I'm not too sure about that. I do. I've had mystical experiences myself, and there is an impression in there that pretty much virtually everyone who has had this experience, that consciousness seems to be something that's indestructible, that it's something that can't die.
I'll be honest with you. I've had what people would describe as a mystical experience. I think it was mystical. I smoked DMT twice, hallucinatory property, and it sent me to heaven, so to speak. But my body was still on the bed. I mean, I've had witnesses that let me know I was still in the bed, but it made me feel like I was traversing into another dimension and talking to people and talking to entities and, having that experience. So I understand what you're talking about. The human mind is capable of generating these sort of hallucinations, these sort of experiences, right? But whether I can attribute that to an actual immortal soul that I have, I don't know about that. That would be kind of a leap in logic for me to do that, right? Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Well, when you say
Yes,
DMT, Are you talking about ayahuasca, or are you saying that you vaped it?
No, I smoked DMT directly.
Oh, okay. Let me see. Well, I've heard a lot of accounts from people who've had vape DMT, and I understand that I have never tried DMT. That's on my bucket list, but I've had other psychedelics, and DMT from people that I hear who have sole experience with psychedelics through vaped DMT. As you know, it's a very short-lived experience, but despite being 5 to 10 minutes, the experience itself could feel like eternity.
Hmm.
And uh, I wish I had some experience with it myself, because I wonder, I question how much you can grab out of it. Like such, because
Well,
it's so
can I
short
leave
lived.
you? Can I explain a little bit
Sure.
the impression that I got coming into it, experiencing it, and then coming out of it? The impression that I got was that reality is one thing, that I'm part of reality. This whole thing kind of dissolves, this whole separation, time ended. But all of those are brain functions. There's parts of our brain that give us solidity, that give us, the perception of, you know, me and you and this and that. Is, time, where we are in space time. Our brain does that naturally. But when you take this substance, it seems like it shuts those capabilities off. And so you have this, impression that there is no space time, there is no, um, here and there, separation, so to speak. And you have this very loving, sort of blissful, sort of feeling. Even after coming out of it, you just feel like you just want to love everybody. And the same thing with like MDMA, ecstasy. It gives you those sort of feelings. But the brain is a very mysterious organ. The brain is a very not very well understood organ. So it could just be that these sort of properties affects our brain in ways that makes these sort of experiences of reality. Now, I'm not saying that one is more true than the other. I mean, we all know that our waking life is kind of a illusion in a way. That's why we have religion. I think that these type 1, type 2 errors lead to religion and these false attributions is what I would say. What do you think?
I've heard this argument before that the psychedelics shuts down your ability to tense time, your space between you and the other.
Well, they excite it. I don't know if shut down is the right word, because I think what it made a better description is that it excites. It's almost like it makes my brain overactive.
Yeah.
That's what kind of the impression I got was that my brain just was overloaded. And when you look at like scans of people's brains, of people that were under hallucinatory DMT, stuff like that, their brain is hyperactive at that moment. Just like in NDEs, like they measured people's brain activity before they're dying or while they're dying. It seems like their brain just kicks in this super
Yeah, it lights up like a
activity.
Christmas tree. And there's more neuronal activity going on in a psychedelic experience than in a normal waking consciousness. And even in the UK studies, they talk about, maybe you're familiar with the default mode network, where the self-reflective areas of the brain, that they attribute to ego. Like, I do this, I'm going to do this tomorrow, I did this yesterday. These parts do shut down inside the brain, yet there's still hidden activity, more activity than you would find in ordinary consciousness. That's one argument you could make. But if you look into a lot of the research in psilocybin induced mystical experience that they use at Johns Hopkins, for instance, the professionals will say that they see no distinction between what they're inducing in their volunteers and what mystics have described throughout millennia.
Yeah.
Ages. They find it. They do admit it's a biologically normal experience. There's nothing supernatural about it. I think people get confused because you mentioned that some of the criteria there that one of them is they have 6 that they go by, but one of them is transcendence of space and time. People have the impression that all time collapses on itself, all past, all future collapse into the moment.
Yeah, same with the NDE stuff. There's core, the core properties or, experiences. But I guess my point is that it doesn't really matter. The attributions aren't as important as the experience themselves. It seems like a lot of people, religious thinking people, want to use this kind of stuff as evidence for the afterlife and evidence for an immortal soul or evidence of God or what have you. What do you guys think? What do you think, Brian?
I think it's just the opposite. I've had a lot of experience myself, especially with the mushrooms. And I think it's more likely that our concepts and our ideas of the supernatural and these experiences came from our brains.
Right. That's what I mean.
It's a natural process. Excuse me?
No, I agree with you.
Yeah, and I think that's where really even a lot of religion came from, is from those kind of experiences. And it just seems the most parsimonious explanation.
Because we know brains exist. We know the mind is full of illusions and it creates reality for us. And we project our internal ideas of reality onto the outside world that we observe. We tend to actually the outside world is kind of a reflection of who we are in our mind, because you could have a religious person, he sees Jesus in everything. What do they call it? Putting on your God colored glasses or whatever. So everything they see in reality has God written all over it. When they see the cloud in the skies, it looks like Jesus, or it looks like, their favorite character,
You
What do you think, Sam?
Proof of God. Look at the trees.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm going to add something about the immortal soul. So in the Bible, nowhere does it ever say that we have an immortal soul. Nowhere. You can't find those two words together. In fact, in Genesis, it says we became a soul. We became a living soul. And then it also says that dead animals are souls. So,
right. Well, that's the Orthodox Jewish point. Yeah, that's the Jewish view.
But that's what it says. It doesn't never does it say that humans have an immortal soul. It only says that we became a living soul. I just wanted to point that out because how does he pronounce it? Cafe?
Yeah, my real name's Jimmy. If you prefer that.
I didn't hear. Your real name is
Jimmy.
Jimmy. So I think Jimmy was talking about, and you both were talking about immortal souls. It's just nowhere in the Bible, anyway.
Exactly. The immortal soul idea, I think, was mainly a Greek idea, Babylonian, Egyptian sort of idea that crept into early church Christianity, like the Roman Catholic Church. Probably, I don't even think Christians may have even thought much about souls or anything like that. I think that they definitely believed in going to heaven and ruling over the earth from heaven. I think the Bible, the Revelation, I don't know whether it was meant to be literal or not, but it talks about 144,000 of kings over the earth, and these were the saints. And Paul talked about the church of saints, so everybody was considered a saint back in the for early church. And so their heavenly hope was sort of kind of like a recreation, almost like the way that a lot of scholars put it. God sort of creates you with a new body, and you go to heaven with a new body. And there may even be some sort of earthly class of people that they rule over, apparently, unless the earth meant something else in the Revelation. I don't know. It's a lot of speculation. But either way, we're talking about, immortality. And a lot of people that come from a Christian background, they're heavily influenced by the Catholic Church, the Protestantism, that part of Christendom, and those sort of ideas talk about immortal souls, spirits, the Holy Ghost, these sort of very Greek ideas, But anyways,
Yeah,
I agree with you. I agree with you.
yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean,
it comes to immortality, but I think you're right. Most denominations really preach a new physical body,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of Christians that don't even understand that that's what their denomination preaches. They're in the pews believing that we're going to have some kind of immortal soul, and their
Right,
religion's really preaching, you're going to get a whole new body.
right. And they
yeah,
they just in in these schools where these people learn to be preachers and officiate, with titles. They know all this stuff in seminary school. They go over all this stuff. They talk about how these ideas like of the Trinity, of immortal souls, of hellfire, all of these things. These are very late coming sort of
yeah,
concepts. They're not. They don't really reflect the Bible. They reflect mainly the church.
yeah. So the whole hellfire thing, and that really came from Dante's Inferno. I'm sure
Mhm.
you both already know that. So I mean, there wasn't. It used to be that like second death was non-existence, and then you had Dante's Divine Comedy in the Inferno, and then I think who was it? It was one of the early church fathers, and I think it was Tertullian, if I'm pronouncing his
Hmm.
name right. I think it was him that his quote that Plato said that we have an immortal soul, and then he took Dante's Inferno, and so he combined them together and said, all right, so if you die and you don't believe in our God, you're going to be suffering forever in an eternal hellfire. So
Hmm.
at least the last church I was in, the last denomination, we didn't believe that. We believed the second death was that you rise. Take Ezekiel, the valley of the bones. You take Ezekiel that you come back you come back alive in your original body, and then if you're incorrigibly wicked, you get cast into a lake of fire and you're dead forever. Not death is
Yeah.
non-existence. That was the last church I belonged to. That was they were the most logical. That was the worldwide church of God back then. I think they've changed that.
Mm.
Oh,
We're talking many.
Annihilationists. Yeah.
What's that?
that Herb was that Herbert Armstrong?
Yes, yes, it was
Yeah,
Armstrong. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So that was the last church I belonged, but at least they were the most logical. They didn't believe in a Trinity, which is ridiculous. Three gods in one. They didn't believe in eternal hellfire. They didn't believe everybody that God is trying to save the world now. Only a few that God's trying, and then everybody will get their chance on the three resurrections. The first resurrection is of all the saints, all those who are saved. Second
Mhm.
resurrection is those who are God's not calling. Then you get a chance to be taught by God and the saints, and so then most of them will accept God. And that would be most of it. So that very, very few people get cast in the lake of fire and die forever. Very few. The incorrigible
Is that
wicked.
what
I
is
kind of
that
like
what's
that.
called post trib? Is that like post tribulation
I,
teaching?
I,
I
I,
forgot.
yeah, I can't remember because this was way. I'm over 60, so this is back in my 20s. And from what I remember, from that was my last church before I had my epiphany. There was three resurrections. One, all those who God is calling today that accept and they're saved. Then just about everybody else who God's not calling, they'll get their chance on the second resurrection. Then most of them are going to be saved. And then only
Yeah.
the really wicked people, the ones who are just so extremely wicked, like the Hitlers and the Trumps, those are the ones that will be cast in the lake of fire and die and then not suffer forever, but just be non existent, gone.
Yeah. Jimmy
That church.
says he quotes Ecclesiastes 12:7. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. It kind of reminds me of that one that says, "For the dead know nothing at all. The memory of
That was
them will be
King
forgotten."
Solomon. King Solomon said that, right? The dead know
Yeah,
nothing.
yeah, that's right.
The dead know nothing, right?
The dead
Yeah.
know nothing at all.
Yeah, I mean,
And
was a Bible thumper back then, man.
Oh yeah,
Look,
me too, man. I was.
I wasted all those years. Jesus.
Well, now
Wasting
you
my
can kind of help others get out of that crap, maybe.
yes, hopefully. Like DM Turner, who I can't see anymore because when I logged on to him, I can't use YouTube because then I'm not sure what happened. So I don't see any of his posts now.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's confused.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then he chickened out. He could get right on here right now. Come on here. Don't give us no bullshit that you can't. Come on here right now. All right.
Yeah. Come on in, man. You're more than welcome.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be
attack you
nice.
as-
No, I'll be
Yeah,
nice.
we're here to have cordial conversations. We talk about how you come to your belief, and we attack the belief. If we don't, if
No.
you give us a bad argument, we're not going to attack you for it. We'll just say that we'll point it out. I mean, we have a right to. You're trying to convince us of something, then we don't want to be scammed, and conned into believing bullshit.
There's good people and bad people. So these Christians that say you have to believe in our God or you're going to hell, give me a fucking break. Look, there's people that would never harm other. I had to get my one dog is terrified of flies. So there's a fly in the house, and I had to get it out. I didn't want to kill it. I just wanted to get it out. I mean, really. I mean, if I can not harm any life, I will not harm life. If I can't, if I have to, and I'm talking about like when we're talking about insects and stuff, but there's people that don't care. They'll harm life and they don't give a shit. Like,
well, yeah, and that shows your compassion for conscious beings. If you think an insect may be possibly aware of itself and its existence, you want to give it respect to say, look, I don't want to kill that thing because it may not want to die. And that's just being a good person. Whether the insect is really self-aware or not, I don't know. But
yes,
I understand your point. You're saying that it could be, or maybe you think it is, and you don't want to kill the thing,
I think there's two types of people. Those that can do and maybe not at that level, but those that can like rape, kill, murder, beat somebody up. Just like there's people that can do that, and then turn around and say, "I want forgiveness from Jesus," and Jesus gives them forgiveness, and then they'll go to heaven. And then other people who would never believe in Jesus but could never do those things, they go to hell. It's just ridiculous. It's really.
And just for clarification, Jimmy is DM Turner, as it turns out. He just mentioned DM Turner didn't chicken out. That's actually my alternate account. So
get in your regular account. I'm on board. Now I got four. I got four different accounts. This is my one. So come on. So use your other one and come on in here. Let's go.
Well, that's what I'm saying is Kathy. That is DM Turner.
Kathy is.
Yeah, that is DM Turner. Yeah.
You
So
are
Jimmy-
DM Turner.
So, Jimmy, are you a Christian or?
No, I consider myself a perennialist, and I always have to try to drop and explain that. I don't know if you've ever heard of the perennial philosophy.
I've heard you before. You called into the atheist experience a few years ago, right?
I've got into the atheist experience. I've got invited to certain podcasts.
I've seen probably a lot of your stuff, and I'm familiar with you. I knew you were a perennialist when you were kind of described. I knew you were kind of the same person, but just wasn't absolutely sure.
Yeah, hey, Jimmy, explain that, please.
Yeah. Okay. I'll see if I could bring it
For the audience.
The perennial philosophy heavily surrounds itself around mysticism and the phenomenon of mystical experience, and so it sees it as being an identical core in each of the world's major religions, such that the revelation of the Holy Spirit is one and the same with the nirvana of Buddhism or the samadhi of Hinduism or Fanan in Islam and so forth. It's the Shekinah of Judaism. Each of the world's major religions has a term to refer to this experience that the mystics of each of the world's major religions emphasize. And having had a mystical experience myself, I resonated with this completely. Resonated with the the words of the mystics, and that it totally altered how I view religion. And so I kind of see it doesn't have a particular word for the divine. It doesn't say like, God or because each religion has a various term to refer to the divine. Like the Hindus call it Brahman, and so they say each of the world's major religions has a single source in one metaphysical truth, is kind of the way the perennialists might phrase it. And while, yes, the religions are very diverse and, superficially, they may seem like they're counterintuitive and they contradict one another, what the perennial philosophy proposes that if you scratch each to their very core, you're going to find that identical synonymous experience of that's held within mysticism, the mystical experience. So that's kind of the framework it's interpreted in. I don't know if that gets to a brief explanation of it, but
I actually, so you're DM Turner.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I actually respect you a lot more now. I do, because that's kind of close to pantheism. And
Yes.
and if there's one thing that I respect, if you're not an atheist, but if you're the opposite end of the spectrum, you're a pantheist. I respect that, because then you're saying that God can exist and get to different people in different ways. And so that that I'm okay with, and I'm sorry if I offended you.
No, it's fine.
And, Jimmy, like I kind of resonate with that too. I'm a naturalistic pantheist at least when it comes to the God discussion. So what I would mean to say by pantheism is not necessarily that God is some sort of supernatural being or intelligence or conscious intelligence or anything like that. But I would say that the same arguments you can make for God can be made for naturalism. And so God sort of becomes the naturalistic explanation itself, right? So it's kind of like, there's this nature of reality. This is the God, so to speak, right? It's everywhere. It's transcendent. It's all powerful. It's everything. So that means it's omnipotent. It's omnipresent. But the great thing about it is it doesn't entail the baggage of religion and the baggage of the supernatural God, where you have to explain the problem of evil, the hiddenness problem, all of these different logical omni problems, right? And so in that way, naturalism becomes a better explanation than the God explanation, right? So it's very kind of similar to what you're talking about, Jimmy, in the sense that all religions have in common this core thing that they all share. And I would call that just the human experience, period. Whether it be the illusionary part or the parts that are actually wise and that can benefit us, in some sort of pragmatic sense, or maybe that part of us that has these experiences, these so-called mystical experiences, right? It's all naturally based. It's all based on nature and the nature of reality. And so it's kind of the same thing, but maybe not exactly. Maybe you would think that this God really is a supernatural conscious being. I don't know. Is that your take on it, Jimmy?
Well, you mentioned that you had DMT, right? And I mean, I'm not sure if I would see atheism and naturalistic pantheism compatible. I prefer the term panentheism. I think it gets more to my understanding of how I would view the divine. That are you familiar? You may be, since you've probably experienced it for yourself. Non-dualism.
Non-dualism, yeah.
Yeah, it's the complete collapse of the subject-object dichotomy. So, we perceive ourselves to be these physical entities roaming within space and time, that we traverse an environment. Well, the perception from non-dualism is that you cannot recognize where your body ends and the rest of reality begins, or even recognize any particular point in time, whether it be the past, because all past and all future are coming into one of the same. And
let me ask you though, because that really what you're kind of talking about is this Russellian monism, where everything is one, and the distinctions we make about everything, the compartments that we put everything in, is really all mental. And it's all sort of our brain creates these distinctions. I mean, I think that science, that's kind of like scientific naturalism right there. That you know human concepts, we describe things as this and that. We even break science down into biology, you know in different forms of science. There's all sorts of different research projects in science, and we tend to siphon them off. But reality doesn't care. It's all just reality. It's all one thing, just one reality. And just science is just using those siphoning to understand things, so we can kind of study things and isolate it and kind of understand, like, just the biological process. Let's talk about life. Let's talk about theoretical physics, the laws of nature, things of that nature. But and we do this because we know that the brain likes to make these distinctions, and we like to make stories, and we like to do all this stuff. But I think what you're saying is that beyond the human experience, there's just reality as one thing, that all of these concepts sort of disappear, that reality isn't part of that. Is that right? Would that be making
Yeah, that kind of sounds more towards what I'm getting at, that that this phenomenon that you glimpse inside, like the psychedelic experience that you've glimpsed with DMT, it does seem to be transcendent of all concepts and all our ways to understand things. That there is some kind of, the way I approached it, it seemed like there is some kind of consciousness there, or mind there. Everything.
But is that a feeling or an impression, or is that really a description of reality? And how would we know that?
That's an interesting question. It was definitely the impression in there. And, another thing I learned was that, wow, this is not exclusive to me. This is something that many, virtually every person that, for instance, meets the criteria at Johns Hopkins for what they call a complete mystical experience. Because it's possible there to have a partial mystical experience. It doesn't hit all 6 criteria. So if you hit all 6 criteria, people who report all 6 criteria, they do seem to touch and comment on this kind of universal experience.
What do you think, Brian? Do you have any questions about that?
No, I mean, I see what you're saying, and I don't know, just through my own personal experiences, I've experienced that feeling of oneness and awareness, that everything is part of one thing, but I really never experienced a separate consciousness. I never saw God, and I never saw or felt like there was some other consciousness, other than feeling that the separatedness between me and the rest of the universe, that perception melted away, and I could experience the oneness. But it was oneness with basically, I guess, the natural world, really. And that's just my experience. I've known people that, have seen God and have seen angels, but personally, no.
Yeah, let me piggyback that on Brian. I'm the same way. I've never experienced. I remember a long time ago, someone said, I had people say to me, "You can become born again. Just feel Jesus in your heart." And I remember saying, "Is there something wrong with me? Because I don't get that." I think that's the same thing what Brian's means there. There's people like us. We could it be a difference in evolution of the mind? Some people are a little bit more evolved mentally than others. Not saying that that's a good or bad thing if you're not. I'm just saying, what could that be? Mystical experiences. There's just I've never had one, and I don't see one. I mean, it's not natural. But if someone did have one, it was something that came from their mind. It's something that came from inside their brain, not something that came from outside the brain. I mean, by the way, Scott,
Science has to say. What science would have to say about that because there's a video that I watched. I just pulled it up. The science finally explains why we see ghosts, which is kind of related to this detecting, a mind behind our experiences, right? This might shed a little, at least another perspective on what we're talking about. Anyways, I'll go ahead and play it and let you see what you think about that.
It's 1925. Named Thomas Blackwelder was awakened by a knock at the door. When he opened it, his neighbor, James Pink Chaffin, was looking somewhat flustered. Chaffin asked him if he could go with him to his brother's house. He needed to find something at that house and required the attorney to be a witness. The attorney, somewhat taken aback, said, "You have to tell me what this is all about before I go anywhere with you." Chaffin looked him in the eyes and said, "There's a will my father wrote, and it's hidden in an old Bible." "How do you know that?" the attorney asked. "Your pop's been dead for almost 4 years." "I know," said Chaffin, "because he told me last night." And guess what, folks? The will was there. We guess we should finish the story. It is, after all, one of the most well-known ghost stories in the U.S. Some people have heard it and have decided ghosts are indeed a real thing. The father who died was James L. Chaffin of Monksville, North Carolina, a farmer who worked hard for many years and accrued land and property. In 1921, he had an accident and died. Surprisingly for some, everything in his will went to just one of his 4 sons, Marshall. That will was dated 1905. Marshall was said to have been the dead man's favorite son. And so while the other sons, Abner, John, and James Jr., were understandably a bit upset, they didn't contest the will. Marshall and his wife got everything. Then in 1925, James said he started having crazy dreams that seemed just a little bit too real. In those dreams, his father came to him and said he had written a second will and hidden it. And in that will, he left everything to all the sons. James later said, "I was fully convinced that my father's spirit had visited me for the purpose of explaining some mistake." His father's ghost told him to go look in his old coat, the one he was wearing when he came to him in ghost form. James and the attorney went to Marshall's house, where the coat was stored in an attic. Sewn into one of the pockets was a note. It read, "Read the 27th chapter of Genesis in my daddy's old Bible." When they discovered the Bible, in that chapter 2 pages had been folded together. Within those pages was the will. It was dated January 16th, 1919. Part of it read, "I want, after giving my body a decent burial, my little property divided between my 4 children, if they are living at my death. Both personal and real estate divided equal, if not living, given share to their children." The case went to the court because it had to be decided if the will was indeed real. During the proceedings, people were shocked to hear James's story of the ghost. The judge later ruled that the second will was valid. But you have to ask the question, why would the father have created a kind of puzzle to solve? Why not just tell James where the will was? That was what some of the skeptical public asked. And it's what the Society for Psychical Research asked when they got on the case. Any of you down-to-earth folks are likely assuming that James and his brothers concocted an elaborate plan, and at least one of them tried in earnest to copy his father's signature. They then waited for the right time to hide the note in the pocket and stuff the will between the tattered Bible pages. But at least a few of you will have felt a chill run down your back when hearing the story.
So what do you think about that so far? And by the way, we have Wesley with us. Make sure you turn the volume down on your tab because it's echoing through, Wesley. There we go.
Hi, Wesley.
Hello. I'm in Huntington, West Virginia. My name is Wesley Lawrence Curry II. How do you do?
All right. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yep. You might want to close your YouTube tab.
I prefer a Guinness, but it's hard to get a good Guinness poured in West Virginia.
And real quick there, Wesley. Something's not going right with you.
All right, hold on. I said I would prefer a Guinness, but it's difficult to find a good Guinness poured in any pub in West Virginia.
Yeah, you've got a big echo going on your end.
You got an echo.
Let me see if I can fix that. I'm going to unlink, and I'll be back in a minute or a couple of minutes, okay? Is that okay
you
with
might just close that tab out.
That might be it. One moment, please.
Mm-hmm.
We'll try it.
Okay.
So anyway, before he comes back, so I'm in the Navy and I'm over in Ireland, and we're in the pub late at night, and the Irish people, they're drinking Budweiser, and we're drinking. We want the Guinness. I'll never forget that. Like I asked the local there, I was like, "Why y'all drinking Budweiser? Budweiser?" Like we want the Guinness. I wanted to tell him that, but I'll wait till he gets back on.
Yeah, but related to that story, the ghost, kind of what I wanted to get into a little later was the fact that there are our brain is made up, of different sort of personalities. In most healthy people, there's always one executive personality that always takes over. You'll see the other personalities in other ways, like when you get angry, how they say you become another person. That's another personality that your mind has generated, right? But there are sick people, like there are people with certain mental disorders like schizophrenics or people with multiple personality disorders. And so all of these different entities come out, in an unhealthy way, involuntarily. But they seem to be totally different people with their own will, their own sort of, agendas, right? And personalities and characters. There is even one story of one personality among all of these others that was not blind. This was a person that was born blind, supposedly, but whenever their other alter came online, so to speak, all of a sudden they could see and they could describe colors and describe things. It's like it's like these people, these different personalities, were totally different and disconnected. It's dissociative disorder is what it's called. So that may explain a lot of what we experience when we're under hallucinatory drugs, or whether we're even in deep meditation, or having these sort of mystical experiences that seems like there's this God, or there are these spirits or these other entities out there talking to us. It could just be all within that same brain of ours. What do you think?
Well, the only way I think he's still echoing.
Yeah.
The only way I've thought of ghosts being possibly real is I'm pretty sure you've heard of Everett's many worlds theory, or the possibility that there's parallel universes. I thought, well, what if you're able to glimpse one for a moment, and let's say you have a friend or a relative that in your universe is dead, but in a parallel universe they're alive and well, and for a brief moment you glimpse that parallel universe where they're still alive, to make it seem as though you saw a ghost of your dead relative,
or a glitch in the Matrix, or
kind of like that.
There's all sorts of explanations on that, but how do we test for any of that stuff? Like, how can we really know for certain or have any idea? It seems like the default position for me as a naturalist would be that there's some sort of natural explanation for these sort of experiences. What do you think, Brian?
I mean, of course, I'm right there with you. I mean, the idea that it could be another dimension is certainly possible, but what's the most parsimonious explanation?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we know our minds play tricks on us. We know we have these different experiences. I mean, we know the brain is complicated, but we don't know much about other dimensions, or how to get there, or how to cross them. So,
and Wesley, you're still echoing. Wesley's still echoing. I just wanted to put that out there. You may have to close the YouTube tab if you have it open, so that it won't bleed through. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, I closed it. I attached a microphone to my tablet. Is the microphone working?
Yes.
Yeah,
I
can hear you. Okay. No, I'm not getting an echo here.
Yeah, but we're getting a really bad feedback and echo on your end.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Well, maybe
I'm going to mute you for now. Go ahead and check it out.
Maybe check it out.
It's really echoing bad.
Come on, Wesley. I want to hear what Wesley got to say.
Yeah, I'd like to hear
I
it
know.
too.
I really do.
But Jimmy, I mean, do you see my point? I mean,
Yeah, I see the
Yes.
point, but I think I'm not too sure, because if you call it like a glitch in the brain, then you're gonna have to argue that there's a glitch that has been occurring throughout history and mystics throughout the ages. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
almost as though you're saying we're at some level biologically faulty when these things occur.
Yeah.
And I
That's
can't
exactly
see-
what I'm saying, I guess.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't see it that way. I mean that would mean that like all of religion is a byproduct of a glitchy brain. Is essentially what you would be arguing if you
Do you
were
think
trying to.
that? Do you think it's possible that the human brain can be um, prone to such delusions and illusions? Do you think that's possible?
Sure, but I wouldn't equate a delusion to mystical experience, and I don't think neuroscientists do either. Professionals involved in this research definitely wouldn't equate it to some type of delusion or some type of glitch in the brain.
Do you think that our normal waking experience is a kind of illusion?
In a sense, yes, but I mean, there is illusions in our perception, but our brain maps onto reality sufficient enough to, get out a mostly clear picture of it, of what we perceive at any given time. Of course, there's things like the blind spot in the eye, and there's areas where our brain makes up that area of the blind
Yeah,
spot.
fills in. Yeah,
Yeah, it fills in the gaps and stuff like that.
the
And
gaps. Yeah.
there's a lot of
My
stuff like
take
that.
on that. My quick
Yeah,
take
but
on that is
let me
that.
get on this. Let me real
Oh, go
quick.
ahead. Go
So
right ahead.
first, number one, Scott, I sent you a friend request on Facebook.
Okay, cool.
Brian, is that weed?
No. I'm smoking a cigarette,
See,
man.
all right. I wish I could, but because of my job, I can't smoke weed.
I'm living in Texas, man. It's not legal here yet.
Oh, damn. All right.
So I
And
don't
then
smoke
Jim.
on camera.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Jimmy, how do you? Here's the way I look at it. Like, just I know people laugh at me when I say this. I don't have any beliefs. I don't believe in anything. I really don't. And I know Aaron Raw says this and that. And I know other atheists do. I have no beliefs. So I only go by what's fact. If it's not a fact, then I have to weigh the evidence and then say, well, this is possible, or it's not possible, or it's probable, or it might be likely, but no belief. So one thing we know, humans in the past, our ancestors, they were more prone to mysticism. They were more before science, humans would think that the stars in the skies were the residents of gods and angels and devils. That was their beliefs. So could it be that we're still, like, it's still a remnant today where a lot of humans still have beliefs that these gods and these angels exist, but not as much. Now we don't today. If you're a human today saying the sky above, the stars are where, right there is where these are gods and angels and demons, people will laugh at you. But back in the past, that was accepted. That's where they lived. It was the third heaven or whatever they called it. So could it be that just it's human evolution of the mind, and that some people are now evolving mentally, have evolved further, eliminating such things that there's no facts for. There's no fact at all that can say that there's a God, that there's angels,
Right.
that there's nothing. So,
But to be fair to Jimmy, I think if I understand what Jimmy's saying, is he's saying those are the attributions, but it's all based on that core experience. In other words, what you're saying is like ancient man explained these things with gods and angels and demons, and so that explains the mystical experience. But I guess what Jimmy's saying is that doesn't explain the mystical experience. That explains the attribution of the mystical experience. Like, in other words, there's this common there's this common experience humans have on the normal, you know, and then we, depending on what time or what culture you exist in, you're going to explain it as aliens, or if you're, or simulation theory if you live in the 21st century. Whereas if you're living in the 15th century and below or before, around that time, the Dark Ages, for in other words, you're going to attribute it to angels and demons and things like that. Or, today you could explain it as brain function, some sort of natural function of the brain that's highly mysterious. Um, but I'm not really sure what is, Jimmy. What are you attributing it to? Yeah, I think you said something about a higher consciousness or something like a god. What would you say, Jimmy?
Yeah, we could say mysticism, and mysticism is defined by the unity of man and God. It says
What is God? What do you mean by God?
Okay, we could, in a lot of theological writings, like scriptures, whether it be Hinduism or Christianity, there is, you might read that you can't have a description of God because God defies all description. God is transcendent of all concepts, but nevertheless, theologians have tried to speak on the nature of God, and that's why we have theology.
Right,
And
but what do you think God is? Like, what is your
if
idea?
I had to put it in like simple terms and try to lay some words over it, the one I've come to, the culmination of the descriptions that I've come across, the one I've been liking the best lately is unbounded consciousness. So
unbounded consciousness.
Yeah, like a consciousness that doesn't have any limits. So like there's no limit in time and space.
Okay, now let me ask you this question. I don't mean to cut you off. That unbounded consciousness idea that you're calling God, is there a way to falsify that belief or that God? Is there a way to prove it doesn't exist?
Well, I really think that that's what we glimpse inside the heights of these mystical experience. And
I know that's what you believe. I'm not actually asking you that, but I'm just saying, is there a way to disprove that idea?
I wouldn't know how to go about it because I already see it as the fundamental aspect of mystical experience.
I wouldn't either. I wouldn't know how to disprove such a thing. Brian, do you think there's any kind of way to disprove God like that? That kind of God?
I couldn't imagine how. I mean, it's kind of a vague description when you say unbounded consciousness. I mean, when I think of consciousness, I think of processes that are occurring in a physical medium, and I can't really imagine how they would occur outside of that medium.
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, because we reside in ordinary consciousness most of the time. Most people have not had a mystical experience, so we think intense time because we always have the ordinary perception of like, I did this yesterday, I'm doing this tomorrow. We never have a state of consciousness where all time is occurring simultaneously, all past, all future. Then the impression you can get inside one of these mystical experiences is that you're everything in a sense. You were the car, the tree,
Let me ask you this. If we could recreate that experience in a laboratory, like if we could put you and put like this God hat on or God helmet, and they connected electrodes and sort of shocked your brain somehow, and it could make you have this experience of timelessness, and because it almost sounds like epilepsy. That's this kind of thing that epileptics experience. If they could do that to you, would that change your view at all?
Well, I think we do that. Like there is something called the God helmet. There is a book written by Jo Bolt Taylor where she describes a stroke that very similar to these experiences that I'm talking about. Might as well be identical because that's how similar it is.
So that correlation then exists. That brain to experience correlation is.
Yeah, it's literally called the God helmet. You've never heard of it?
I've heard of that. That was back in the 80s or 90s, really, even.
Yeah, they even put Richard Dawkins in it, but he didn't fall into the criteria of people who have this induced mystical experience during the session.
So, are you saying that you agree that the brain sort of mediates that experience?
Yeah, definitely. One thing a lot of people get into that have had this, you know, whether no matter how professional they are, they could be neuroscientists like Stanislav Grof, for instance. He says he no longer believes that consciousness is generated by the brain, and so the spiritualist kind of sees it as so there you might have an atheistic model where the brain when the brain dies, consciousness blinks out, consciousness ends, uh, whereas spiritualists might see it, consciousness, the brain is more like a transceiver, kind of like a radio, that receives a signal, and consciousness, it comes in like a signal to the brain, and the brain acts as a transceiver for it, rather
How
than.
does that work? Like, how does where does it come from, and how does the brain hijack this signal to give us
Yeah,
an experience? How does that work?
man, I don't think it would be called the hard problem of consciousness for nothing. Like when you ask where does the signal come from, uh,
But
you
the
know,
hard problem of consciousness only is a hard problem for the materialist. And it sounds like what you're saying is you're not a materialist. So it seems like you're not a materialist. Um, then there should be some way to explain, right? I
yeah.
guess. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, I when you ask where, like I'm not too sure if you ever heard of there's this idea in quantum physics, like quantum entanglement and stuff like that, and
Hmm.
or non-locality. I don't know if you've ever heard of that one, but that's
Hmm.
non-locality, meaning that it's everywhere. It doesn't draw
Right,
it
but
from a
that's on
specific
the
point.
level of the subatomic particles and stuff. That's not really um, because we experience the 3D world, we experience the macro world,
Yeah,
we experience the classical mechanical world, right? Like we don't experience billiard balls going through walls like in quantum mechanics, right?
sure, but I mean, this is lays at the basis of our reality, and it
Well, yeah, and I
yeah.
agree. I mean, quantum mechanics is the basis of all reality. But well, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what do you mean by how does quantum entanglement explain how our brain is a radio transceiver? I'm not sure how that works.
Well, so I'm pretty sure you've heard like the quantum entanglement, the spin down
Hmm.
and spin up of atoms. So like,
Yep.
no matter how far they come apart in space and time, if they were once intimately connected to each other, then they will remain this connectivity. So
Correct.
if you posit the Big Bang, that means all matter has its
Connected.
connections. So like you have spin down on one side of the universe and spin up on the other. Like it
But
still has
that's
this.
only if they're interacting, right? Like there's certain atoms that don't have that entanglement property, right?
Mhm.
It's only when the entanglement happens when an observation is made. Like, and an observation doesn't mean like a set of eyes put on it. It's just an instrument or another set of
Excuse me.
processes somehow interfere with that state, and then they become entangled. So the spin
Yeah.
up here means spin down there, regardless of how far they're separated, which is really cool stuff. It's really wild stuff. I agree, but I'm just trying to figure out
Well,
how does that make
I could try to
the
say it this way. I've heard Michio Kaku put it this way. He said, that if let's say the many worlds theory is true, that we reside in one of infinite universes, and so you have universes where dinosaurs never died, where Hitler won the war, so on and so forth.
Yep.
That means your brain only coheres and is tuned in to this particular universe. But even despite the fact that it simultaneously exists in every other possible universe, and so that's one example of a brain acting as a transceiver. I think the transceiver model is more accurate to the demonstration that he's trying to offer there.
Can I let
I
me
didn't follow
interject there.
that, to be honest.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian. Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Brian.
I just really didn't quite follow. That seemed like a non sequitur to me.
Yes.
Yeah, because I'm not sure how,
Yeah,
because we're talking about a radio, kind of something analogous to a radio signal going to everybody's brain, I guess, to project this soul in, or this sort of experience of life that we're having here. I'm not really sure how that works, or
it
I'm just
doesn't.
not sure.
It doesn't. Look, so the brain produces consciousness. There's no doubt about that. I don't go by what anybody says, because that's a belief. You got to believe in somebody. I go by what are the facts. So let's take a look at the facts. Someone goes into a coma. They have no brain activity. That they know there's nothing being. They have damage to their brain. There's damage to their body. So they're in a coma. They don't have any consciousness. If it was something that was coming in from somewhere else, then they wouldn't be in a coma. I mean, okay. So I had 2 colonoscopies. When I go in for my colonoscopy and get injected with propofol, whatever, and then I don't even know that I'm under. I don't even know I'm under. So there's nothing energetic. It's my brain that produced the consciousness. I have no consciousness. I could have been dead. As a matter of fact, something could have happened on the table where I'm getting the colonoscopy, and I'd have been dead. I would have never known it. I'd never known I was dead. A good way to go, by the way, because you don't even know.
The really interesting thing, the question to really ask to me is why is the brain and neurons correlated to any experience at all? Forget a near-death experience or a out-of-body experience. How do you explain an in-body experience? Like what is it about neurons that produce an experience at all? Like, that's the most interesting and I think unsolved mystery of today in neuroscience. There's definitely a correlation. Without your brain, there is no consciousness, obviously. For your ego and your personality and your character and your wants and desires and dreams, you're going to have a brain and a body and all that. I guess the question is, why is that correlation exist at all? I think until we can answer that one, we're going we're kind of reaching with this whole thing about dualism and things of that nature. I don't see how dualism even solves the problem. It's just now we have a hard problem of matter. How do you solve the hard problem of matter? How does a combination of matter produce a conscious experience? I mean,
all I know is
we can figure that.
Go to any graveyard and ask any person if they're alive or if they have consciousness.
No, they're obviously they're obviously dead. They're not going to talk to you. But the whole question is not really that, but the question is, how do living brains experience anything? Like, all of this stuff could go on in the dark, like a computer, like a zombie, what they call a P zombie, a philosophical zombie. Like, I think the experience, to me, it just seems like the experience is an afterthought. It's kind of like a story we tell ourselves of what's already generated in our brain. Like, it ramps up, our unconscious ramps up, and we tell a story to ourselves, and it becomes this elaborate experience. But how does that work? No one knows. That's my whole point. Yeah, no one really knows. And
if you tell your story to yourself, like, there's people like me, I don't tell reality. I have a hoodie. I have a personal relationship with reality. If it's not reality, then to me, should be to anyone, then it doesn't exist. I mean, this is reality. Right. I think Brian.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is everybody tells themselves, what I mean is, like, say
I don't
you
have
hurt
to
your
tell
finger.
myself anything.
No, I mean you hurt your finger. Like say you stick your finger in
Okay.
fire, something like that,
Yeah.
and then you have this experience of pain. Well, this experience of pain happened before you were even aware of it. So what I'm saying is that this signal
Yes.
went to your brain, part of your brain first, then it generated this conscious experience of that you call pain, fire, the whole story. I'm not saying like a story, like a movie. I'm saying like you're generating a explanation to yourself, like, oh, I burned myself. You did. That's reality. But I'm just saying that how does the matter of all these neurons coalescing, how does it actually, like, what neuron controls the flavor of chocolate versus vanilla?
But here's
Like,
the thing. Here's the thing. Scott. Here's the thing. What you're saying. You're saying you and your in singular. Fire burns everyone. So I don't want to get into this right now, but I am going to go a little bit. In philosophy, it says that knowledge is a subset of belief. Mm-hmm. Knowledge is justified true belief. Mm-hmm. I totally disagree with that, and I argue it all the time. And if you want to have another show on that, bullshit.
Sure.
Knowledge is separate from belief. It's separate. Knowledge is objective and it's external. It's based on external things in reality. Beliefs are internal, what you believe the reality is, that you claim is reality, and it's subjective. So what you just were talking about, when you stick your finger in a fire or whatever, you get burnt. We all get burnt. We all, everyone is burnt.
Sure.
That's sure. Knowledge. That's knowledge. So, I mean, this whole thing about the consciousness, there's no one who's dead has a consciousness. That's a
whole other, I guess that's another topic.
I know it is, but in a way it's still the same, because beliefs where we require knowledge will say that everyone who's dead does not have a consciousness based upon the facts. You're dead, you don't have a consciousness. Mm-hmm. Belief, when you believe, you could say that someone who's dead has a consciousness somewhere else because you believe in something else. That's what I'm talking about. And I want to hear Brian's opinion on this. I really do.
Well, I'm not as quite as hardcore as that.
I think you would. There's not many people who are. But go ahead, Brian. I want to hear you.
Well,
I just want to hear you.
I mean, I'm a hardcore skeptic, but I believe knowledge is justified true belief. I mean, you have to get down to the core of we can't know anything. You can't say I absolutely know anything except, I think, therefore I am. That's the only statement you can make that you can be 100% sure of. So you have to go from there. You have to acknowledge that, and then that will lead you to the path of discerning imagination from reality.
So what you just said, Brian, was I think, therefore I am, right?
Right.
So that person that's not a belief.
That can't be a belief.
No,
that has
it's not
to
a
be
belief.
knowledge.
Nope.
It's knowledge. It's knowledge. I'm aware I exist, therefore I am.
Right.
Well, then knowledge comes before belief. Wait a minute. Knowledge comes before belief.
But that's the only thing I can say I know. Okay, from there, I don't know for sure that I'm a guy sitting here talking to people on the internet.
Okay.
I could be a brain in a vat.
Oh,
I could be in the Matrix. You brought up philosophy. You brought up philosophy.
Well, I in my opinion, like Dr. Tyson, who I just talked to recently, and also others, philosophy is dead. The only thing that's alive in philosophy is critical thinking, but all the other philosophical arguments are dead because philosophy did give birth to science.
Now, many would argue, though. Many would argue that that's a philosophical statement that you just made.
Well, yeah, you can argue it. And again, if people argue with me when they say to me, when I say I have no beliefs, they'll say to me, that's your belief. But that's not. Because a belief is accepting something to be true or I'm not accepting something to be true. That's me. I know I don't have no beliefs. But let me get back to Brian. So what you said was justified. So back in the day, when gods were justified to be knowledgeable, they used different types of arguments, and they said, we justify God to exist, so we have knowledge of God.
Well,
that's subjective, but that justified true belief is subjective. Knowledge is not subjective. It's not. So knowledge would be. Wait a minute, real quick. Knowledge would be.
They had a justified belief that wasn't true.
Wait. Then we could say that then justified true belief is a knowledge, isn't it? True has to be knowledgeable. Something has to be known to be true. It has to be a fact. Knowledge is a fact. What are the facts? And they have to be shown to be true. So if we say that knowledge is justified true belief, and yet you had philosophers in the ancient days because they were afraid or whatever the reason was, they said, we justify the existence of God because the universe exists, this or this or this or that, and we say we have knowledge of God. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. The justified true belief is fucking bullshit. It's subjective. What is knowledgeable is certain things like, we need water, fresh water to drink to survive. Tell me that has to be a belief. Tell me that has to be justified. It doesn't. It doesn't. If you don't think that that's the fact, that we need water to survive, fresh water to drink, don't drink any water.
In philosophy, people get very pedantic, and that's the part of the problem I have a lot with philosophy as a very everyday sort of normative sort of exercise, because what they'll say we got the problem of inference. You don't know whether tomorrow those rules are going to change. You don't know that. You just know that now. You only know that your experience of yourself now and how things seem to work. But tomorrow that might be changed. Now, there's no reason. It's bullshit in a way, because there's no reason for me to believe that certain sort of things are ever going to change.
So let me turn it around for you, Luke.
Go ahead, Brian. Go ahead, Brian.
Let me turn this around for you.
Okay,
so we're talking about solipsism. So this is kind
of that's bullshit. But go ahead, solipsism.
Okay, but you can't prove it's not.
Yeah, I can. No, I can.
Let me explain my standing on it first. Okay, I don't know if you know the story of Samuel Johnson and the bishop. The bishop and Samuel Johnson are walking out of church. The bishop's telling them about solipsism. You can't prove that the world is real. This all could be an illusion. And Johnson comes up to a big rock and just kicks the rock as hard as he could. And he says, I refute it thus. So a philosopher says that he's wrong, that he did not refute it because that rock could have been an illusion. But they missed the point. It doesn't matter if it's an illusion. Every time you kick that rock, it's going to be hard as a rock. So even though you can say, well, it's possible that we're in a matrix, or it's possible we're in a brain in a vat, we have no evidence for that.
Right.
We have to go where the evidence leads. And the evidence leads that rock is real, and my foot is real, and reality is reality.
Well, first of all, the definition of reality is one of my favorite. I'm going to stop there on that. So if we're in a matrix, or we're a brain in the vat, who is the brain in the vat? You? Me? Scott?
That's a good question. Good question.
Wait, okay, but that's the beginning. That's the first question. Who is the brain in the vat? Is it one of the billions of people on this earth? Who's the brain in the vat? This is why the brain in the vat is stupid. It's fucking stupid. Who's the brain in the vat? All right, so if it's you, and everybody else exists, and you'll still then off yourself. You're still going to exist because it's the brain in the vat, and you're just one part of it. Or if it's me, I'll off myself right now, and everything's still going to be the same because I'm the brain in it. I mean, it's the brain in the vat is ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
In the Matrix, everyone is the everyone is the brain in the vat.
Oh, good. Wait a minute. I like that, Jimmy. So everyone is the brain in the vat. Everyone. So we're all brains in one vat.
Yeah, and we're sharing this hallucination that is the Matrix.
Yes. Okay. So we're all brains in one vat, and we're all sharing a hallucination that's the Matrix. So if you die or I die, it doesn't matter because we're just a brain in the vat, and we're just a part of the brain. So the brain still exists, so it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, I guess not, man. I mean,
well, then what difference does it make if we all kill ourselves?
No, I agree with that. I've never really agreed with solipsism of any sort.
Everyone, the brain in the vat can.
Yeah, the brain in the vat is kind of just a highlighter for philosophers, and that's why I said it's not a pragmatic tool in everyday normative life for me. These sort of thought experiments and extreme thought experiments like that are just there to kind of highlight limitations and things of that nature. Not necessarily that those things are true, but just you could even use like a brain in the vat sort of argument against religious beliefs. Like you could say, you don't know if God is true. You could be a brain in the vat. You don't know if angels and demons are really there. Those are brain. I mean, this is old philosophical stuff that goes back thousands of years. But as far as taking it literally or taking it seriously, that's a whole nother topic. But I don't. I just use them as ways of exposing people's claims of knowing things that they just really don't know.
Yes. Wait a minute. That's exactly where I'm going. So in that case, like I said, knowledge is separate from belief. Knowledge is not a subset of belief. Knowledge is not justified someone's belief, because maybe Jimmy's belief can be justified, and he can say what I believe is knowledge. Knowledge is what is factual, what is true. We need fresh water to survive. We need.
And you're bringing up
food. We need
circularity.
We need food to eat.
Yeah. And you're bringing up a very good point. Like everything you're saying, I agree with. Like to a certain extent, yeah, you're right. There's knowledge and there's belief because, like for example, I think therefore I am. It's a really good point to say that is just knowledge. You don't believe that you exist.
Exactly.
You know you exist because if you didn't exist, you couldn't be having this conversation to begin with.
Exactly.
I mean,
so wait a minute, Scott. So real quick. So since we humans, knowledge predates belief. Before you can have any concept of belief, whether you believe in something, don't believe in something, lack of belief in something, you have to have knowledge of what any of those things are.
In a presuppositionalist Christian,
so how can knowledge be a subset of belief? It can't be. Right. It's impossible.
Right.
It's impossible.
And that's a precept argument. I don't know if you're familiar with the precepts, but those guys will say that my worldview of Christianity is based on knowledge. I know God exists. And because if there was no God, we could not be talking about God or talking about anything, because there has to be God to make all of that existence possible in the first place. And so that's how they turn that around too, is they use that same argument you're using to say that there is no justified true belief. There's no subset of, belief is not or knowledge is not a subset of belief. I don't believe in God. I know God exists. And they use that same logic, that same argument. But the thing is, we're all in the same boat. The same thing you're saying.
No. They use They use knowledge as a subset of belief. They use knowledge as justified true belief. That's how they come to their conclusion. Not what I'm saying. I'm saying
Are you familiar with Darth Dawkins and Cy Brudenkate? Cy 10 Brudenkate? Are you familiar with those guys?
You would have to tell me. Well, Dawkins, yeah. I'm not sure about the other guy, but
yeah, Darth Dawkins. Not Richard Dawkins. I'm talking about.
Wait a minute. Before we get into that, I want to I like to keep it simple. Really, it's the KISS system. For Christians to claim, or any theist to claim, that their God exists, they have to use knowledge as a justified true belief, and that knowledge is knowledge is based on belief. They have to use that. There's no other way they can make their claim. There's no other way they can make their claim.
I agree logically. I agree with that.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Agree. I'm not saying I disagree with you. What I'm saying is there are those apologists out there. They're called precepts, and they use the same argumentation that you're using. I promise you.
How?
Like Brian knows exactly what I'm talking about.
How are they? Wait a minute. Before we get, because I want to make sure we have the right.
Let me pretend to be.
Yeah, let's
pretend. Well, but let me set the premise though. So what you're going to tell me now is that knowledge is not a subset of belief. That's what you're going to tell me, and that knowledge, they know that God exists without believing. Okay, go ahead.
That's what they claim. Okay, so
let me see how they do that.
I'm not saying I agree with them. I'm just steel manning their position. So this is what I mean to say. So I'll pretend like I'm one. I'll say that if without a immutable, absolute referent, there is no way that you could ever know what's possible and impossible. You have to have an absolute, immutable, primary, metaphysical absolute. This is what we call God. Without such, everything you say is arbitrary and meaningless. It's just a belief. You have to have God as that absolute reference. So if you referent your brain, or if you referent your evolution, that's like appealing to randomness. It's appealing to blind processes. So it's like me shaking up a Sprite can, shaking up a Coke can, unscrewing the lid, watch them both fizz, and then watch us argue over who's fizzing truth. That's what the atheists, that's what they're doing. They're saying that our brains are a product of blind, random processes in nature. What I'm saying as a precept is that my ability to know what's possible is impossible, is grounded on something perfect, God. You're grounding it on something imperfect, nature. So I have a better understanding of what truth is than you by your own definition, because you're talking about what you believe to be the case. I'm talking about what I know to be the case, because it's grounded in the absolute, irrefutable, immutable, primary we call God. That's how they argue.
That's failure. Go ahead, Brian. Go ahead. Do you want to add on to that?
No, he's pretty much explained it. I mean, both of us, first of all, both of us think it's nonsense. Okay, let's start right there.
I know that.
But that's their claim. Their claim is, I know God exists. I don't believe God exists. I know. And they don't justify it. And it's not justified true belief. It's certain knowledge is what they claim.
Well, they're justifying their belief that they know. I know what you just said, but it's based upon a justification of what they know about God, that they know about God. So again, knowledge comes first. So
Well, that's what they claim.
That's what they claim. God
exactly.
has revealed to them.
Right.
Special revelation,
Right.
natural
But
revelation.
they know that. They claim they know that. Right. We agree on that. I have seen what both of you are saying. But their knowledge on what is known is incorrect. I mean, it's wrong. So what can you do? It doesn't change. It doesn't change the fact. It doesn't change the fact that knowledge is separate from belief. It just means they're confusing the two. They're confusing.
But see, they would tell you you're doing the same thing. They would say you're worse because what you're saying is you believe in naturalism, which is imperfect and not absolute and not all of those things. So you, by definition, are admitting you have a belief about reality.
Yes, except for in my case, all that exists is only natural. There's no known existence in life that is not natural. So there's my.
That's your belief.
No, it's not a belief. Wait a minute. They would say that. They would say that, but they're wrong. Because
so how would you argue? How would you demonstrate that to them? Just
easily. All that is known to exist, life-wise, even everything we know to exist, is natural. There is no known natural, supernatural thing to exist. No, there is no known supernatural to exist. None. And so I would say to them, show me.
Claim, they would say.
No, it's not a claim. Well, maybe it's not a claim because.
So demonstrate. I'm asking you to demonstrate. I'm a priest.
I'm going to demonstrate it
to me.
Right. So we're in 2023. All life that is known to exist is natural, born to die. Whether you're a human,
twice now. So
I don't know what I'm trying to. I don't know what else to say. Like because this is the fact.
Thank you. That's exactly what they're going to tell you when they're going to say everything is based on God. It's supernatural, and you're going to say, "Well, demonstrate." And you say, "I don't know what else to tell you. All I can tell you is that everything is based on God." And you're going to say, "Well, you can't demonstrate it, so I dismiss you." And they'll say, "No, you're the one that's making stuff up. I dismiss you." Because the problem with your position is you admit that it's not based on something absolute, immutable, and primary. You are admitting that your belief that you're claiming is knowledge is based on a claim. You haven't shown me any sort of primary, absolute thing that you reference that statement by. Like, what do you base that on?
Based on all life that is born to die?
But that's entailed.
Name me a life. Name me a life that has not been born to die. That God. You can prove it.
You don't have to. It's not justified belief. It's knowledge. I don't have to. I don't know what else to tell you.
Well, then they're wrong.
Well, you're wrong. Now where do you go?
No, wait a minute. Where I go is all life that is on this planet is born and eventually died. There's no other life that is known to have done that.
Because God has revealed that to us. Yeah, I agree.
Well, that's a belief.
No, it's not. That's my knowledge.
Exactly.
I don't know what else to tell you.
Wait a minute, dude. That's where we're. Wait a minute. Y'all are laughing, but this is exactly why I told you.
I'm laughing because I've been there with you, man. It doesn't make a damn bit of sense. Okay.
Right. I know. That's why I'm laughing. I'm just watching you.
No, but wait a minute. But I want to say, you're laughing, but the bottom line is the fact that that's all they got. Because because why? Because knowledge is not justified true belief. Knowledge has nothing to do with belief. So they just misinterpret. They went by the ancient philosophers before science who got it wrong. And then I'm going to say one thing. There's a lot of atheists, and I've been arguing with them and now Scott, that we're friends on Facebook, you might find out. I argue with other atheists who disagree with me that knowledge is separate from belief. It's not the same thing. It's not a subset. They are two separately different. Knowledge is I think, therefore I am. Belief is after you think and you know you am. Now you got to believe that something is there or something is not or something.
Well, it sounds like
knowledge comes
it
before.
sounds like you're a presup atheist. You're a presuppositionalist atheist, is what you are. They're just a presuppositionalist Christian. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, what you're saying is very concise to that point, and actually, it makes a very good refutation of the presupposition, because just like they can presume and that they have knowledge God exists, you can just presume the opposite the same way. And so where do you go from there? You just can't.
Well,
you can't.
you sort
of short circuit their whole
I
argument.
got you there. But so I always argue that babies. A lot of atheists like to argue that babies are they're atheists. Babies are not atheists. Babies are not atheists or theists. Babies don't know the concept. Mm-mm. They don't even know the concept of atheism or theism. They're nothing.
They're agnostic.
If anything, they're not. They can't make a claim. And another thing is that atheists will do is theists do it too. But for the other end is that you can't presume something on someone else. I can't stand that. Don't tell me that someone else is something until they can make it their own. They can say they are or not. I'm an atheist or I'm a theist. Don't prescribe it. Don't prescribe that on them. Let them say it. But this is the point why I say babies are neither. They're not atheists. They're not theists. They don't have the concept of God in their minds. They have to know that first.
As Jimmy says, Graham Oppie came up with the term innocence to describe the state of babies. Go ahead, Jimmy. Explain that a little bit.
All right, wait, hold on. 1 minute. I want to hear this. I got to whiz and get a beer.
Okay.
All right. No, it was just a way he a term that he wanted to use in lieu of like a theist or atheist, because he didn't want to identify the baby as either, and so he came up with this term innocence. Mm-hmm. Just because like he said, they don't have the concept of either. It's funny that Aaron Ross says the rocks are atheists, and then someone's pointed out, well, atheist describes a person, not an object like a rock, and then so he retracted and said, okay, now rocks are atheistic, and I mean, I don't know, man, it's a funny word game that they play, but no, I wanted to contribute something to the discussion. One thing we haven't really touched on is Eastern philosophy. I don't know if you ever study like Buddhism, Taoism, or stuff like that.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, and I like Hinduism. They have this, so like we're one of the, I guess, missions of the philosopher is to push ideas to the extreme, push a concept to see how far it can go. And usually, sometimes when you push a concept to its further extreme, it dissolves. It no longer becomes an issue or a problem. And like, for instance, we could talk about omniscience. If you possessed omniscience, if you were all knowing, this moment, there would be no reason for you to have a discussion. Right. You wouldn't know what everyone's going to say. So what would be the point? And so the way the Hindus kind of think about God, of course, they use the term Brahman, is that the Brahman sometimes knows what it is. But most of the time, when it creates the material world, it forgets that it's God and plays they call it Maya. The universe is kind of like the stage ground.
Avatar, yeah,
the avatar. So each one of us is a mask of Brahman. Whether it's the grasshopper, the tree, it's playing that it's each role. But when it removes the mask, it realizes its fundamental self, which is Brahman. And so, it eternally plays a game of hide and seek or remember and forget. And
Yeah, no, I kind of believe the same thing, that all of us are just an expression of nature.
yes, and man, I mean, I don't know if you ever mess with like anything outside DMT, vaping DMT, uh, like mushrooms. Because I was introduced
Mhm.
I've
to
done
the
a lot of
psychedelic,
mushrooms.
yeah, through Terrence McKenna, and his heroic dose. And one thing about that I don't know if it's just that you get to, because a lot of people who describe the DMT trip, I believe I've gotten there with mushrooms, but man, with mushrooms you're looking at a 6 to 9 hour duration,
Yeah.
and the height being about 2 hours, and this omniscience that I was talking about, it kicked in to the point where I think I was already coming down at this point. But imagine you have a state of consciousness that's omniscient, where it feels as though you've heard every song, seen every movie, you were everything, you were everyone, infinite times, over and over and over again. This ennui that I couldn't even describe to you. It was like it was like ultimate boredom. There was nothing to do. Everything had been done before, infinite times, over and over. And so when I was coming down, I thought, man, if I don't get out of this state of mind, the only perceivable way I see out is to commit suicide. And that's how profound it was at the time. I was
Mm.
really contemplating ending my life, because it was just too immense, too powerful to even handle. And luckily it wore off, and I was glad to be back, man, in this ordinary state of consciousness, whether you consider it intelligent or dumb, whatever. I was just kissing the ground to be back.
Like when I did crack, it was great. Like, when I did crack, it was awesome. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
But yeah, I
But
mean, it made me afraid of psychedelics, man. I still do it like annually, but I'm always afraid before I go into it, because of stuff like that. But I find it infinitely interesting now, and like so I made it kind of an annual practice to go back in there. And I've been kind of chicken shit lately. I haven't, even though I have them, I've been staying away from them. I don't know if that's on purpose or subconscious, or man, I don't know. Maybe I'm just still afraid. But
That's
I know the right time will come eventually. But the I guess that's the point that I wanted to make. That you know I think the something like the what the Hindus talk about, the Brahman, is always there. It's always something that I think people tap into when they have so-called mystical experiences. And this state we have now is a kind of forgetting. But to me, it makes sense. Because if the Brahman or the universe always remembered, then there would be no point to anything. The whole idea, even life and death, like how Sanford said everything biological dies. I think death would be necessary, because if you live forever, there would be no rush to do anything. You could always put it back to tomorrow. You could always postpone everything all the time. And so our sense of urgency comes from our the fact that we know we're going to die eventually.
A question that I like to ask Christians and Muslims is, why should I be a Christian or a Muslim? Right? Like, for example, I asked the Christian, why should I be a Christian? And he says, well, so that you can live forever in paradise with the Lord. And I'm like, well, why would I want to do that? And like, but they're so confused, that throws them off, because they're like, they just assume everybody wants to live forever and live with the Lord and do all that stuff. And I'm like, it seems like that'd be very boring and very non-meaningful. There'd be no meaning. There'd be no struggle. Like, part of what gives life its, you know, sweetness is the challenges and the struggles and the pain, along with the good stuff. It's good stuff in itself. Like, it all it needs each other. Kind of like Republicans and Democrats, they need each other. And so these polar opposites have to be there in order for us to meet somewhere in the middle and have this experience of meaningfulness. But I find that stuff is pretty common sense, though, if you think about it. Like, You don't need to take mushrooms or DMT to understand that. But I think it does become it kind of clarifies it. It's kind of like I've taken DMT and it was life changing. It made me more zen like, more compassionate, things like that play off these polar opposites and all that. But even without DMT and substances, you can realize that just in logic. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the, when we talk about mystics, a lot of the meditation is taking you into that consciousness. And of course, I don't believe that's an external experience, but just by meditation and different martial arts, these
Mm-hmm.
types of things, you can definitely generate those experiences.
Yep.
But one of my favorite Greek sayings was, immortality is for the gods. I wonder how they can stand it.
Correct.
And I can't imagine living forever. I just can't imagine it.
Not me.
Jimmy,
Especially,
I guess you already have imagined it, and it's not for you.
Oh yeah, I've contemplated it, but that afterlife, I remain curious about it. I don't think anyone knows what's going to happen when we die, and I also don't believe that it's how it's depicted in like cartoons and movies and stuff, like liar and gown, and you're gonna you're gonna remain with the your anthropomorphic self in some kind of ethereal after realm or something. I don't think it's gonna happen that way. I think that's kind of a naive way we portray it, but I still think it's interesting. If people do in near death approach something very similar to what people approach in psychedelics, like this infinite love was another aspect of the experience. I felt this infinite unconditional love for everything, and I felt like the entire world is emotionally asleep in comparison. And if you approach that, I was really young when I had that. I was like 23, so I didn't have much of an ego at the time. I hadn't done much in my life. I hadn't sinned very much, but I imagine that if you approach that later on in life, let's say, and you live the life of sin, it could feel like a very judgmental experience in the presence of that, because and I think maybe that's what I like Tupac Shakur, the way he put it. He's like, he was doing an interview, and I think he was in this like real lavish hotel room with this lady. And he's like, well, this is a piece of heaven for the moment. You're here, we're hanging out. But hell, that's jail. I've been there. And he says it made sense to him that people throughout their life, if they sin, then of course they're gonna, be tormented at night. They can't sleep because they all this guilt weighs on their mind. Whereas if you live the good life, you don't have to worry about things like that. It's all gonna culminate. And if the near-death experience is anything at all like the psychedelic experience, and if you live a life of sin, it may not be. You may experience what psychedelic users call a bad trip, a really bad trip, a hellish psychological experience. And I've always thought, in that sense, that religion may be preparation for death. That it kind of prepares you for to go through that experience smoothly. And if it weren't for the psychedelic experience, it would be a huge question mark for me. And
yeah, it can be a tool, because I think I agree. A lot of people aren't very conscientious these days about much of anything, anyways. Most people are more infatuated with what's going on with reality TV and very superficial things. But let them take DMT or let them take ayahuasca or something like that. It'll change their life totally into a more. Now, there's naturalistic explanation, whether you call it a naturalistic explanation or a supernatural explanation. Either way, I think that the effect is true, though, that people become more deep-minded from doing that sort of stuff. But you've got to be that kind of person to begin with, I think, anyway. So it's kind of hard to tell. But yeah, a lot of people don't understand. Even most people, they go to church, they don't really believe that stuff. They just go out of peer pressure. They go out of, habits, and I was raised this way, and a lot of people aren't really that invested in it mentally.
Yeah, indoctrination and tradition.
Yeah.
I'm gonna interject real quick. So I'm not. I only go by facts. So when we die, we're dead. That's it. Okay, you had your life. Unfortunate for I like to read the obituaries in my area. I feel bad people that die so young, and then I read the obituaries where people die, like say in an age it's respectable, and then people who die at an older age, they really hit the lottery on life. So it's really a crapshoot when it comes to what age you're going to be when you die. I mean, so I'm in my 60s. I feel lucky. So I know there's climate change is bad. I feel really bad for my grandchildren because it was made political, and it really is getting worse. And so, but there's nothing I can do about it. And that's another topic that I feel really useless to where I can help people who are close to me, because there's nothing we can do now. It's Jesus fucking Christ. Trump set us back 6 years. But I wanted to get to is the point that that there's a movie. So I don't believe in no afterlife. So there's a movie called who has seen Defending Your Life? If you haven't, you got to watch it. Seriously, if you've never seen this movie, Defending Your Life.
Defending Your Life.
It's about, yes, Meryl Streep it stars in it. Albert Brooks, Rip Torn, Lee Grant. It's fantastic. There's one, It's a Wonderful Life. But that's kind of like in between. But watch Defending Your Life, because if there is an afterlife, if there is, there isn't, but if there is, that would be the afterlife. That would be it. It's fantastic.
Gotta watch
Albert
that.
Brooks. Albert Brooks, The Simpsons. I love The Simpsons. Who doesn't love The Simpsons? If you like critical thinking, but like if you get a chance to watch it, go ahead and do it, because it really shows if there is an afterlife, that's how it would be. That's all I'm going to say. That
I would think that, in my opinion, I think that by me not counting on anything like an afterlife or anything like that, it makes me appreciate this life that much more. And it makes me want to do better things for the world and better things for other people, because, we're not going to be here forever. We have to cherish it and make the most of it. And so that's the way my view of it. What do you think, Brian?
That's one of my biggest objections of Christianity, in particular, is, they like to say, well, you got to live a good life, and, you have to be virtuous, and you don't sin. But none of that really counts in Christianity. If you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you're saved and you're going to heaven. And it doesn't matter, if Christianity is true, then Jeffrey Dahmer is in heaven, and Anne Frank is in hell. And that's just, to me, a reprehensible concept.
Yep.
That's why. Wait a minute. That's why I watch Defending Your Life, because if you're an atheist or an agnostic, you're going to love it, because it really if there's an afterlife, that's the afterlife. I'm serious. Give it a choice. Give it a chance. And then Scott, since you're a friend of mine now on let me know after you see it. You'll tell me. It's my favorite movie. Well, oh God, It's a Wonderful Life is really good, but it's my favorite movie, depending on afterlife. It is. It really is.
Awesome. I'll definitely do that, man. Hey, look, I'm gonna have to cut out a little short.
Yeah,
now.
me too.
We've actually been going on for quite a while, almost 3 hours tonight. So we've had a lot of fun. I love these conversations and these different perspectives and exploring philosophy and exploring science and religion and the whole thing. This is what the discussion's all about. So if you're watching the show for the first time, man, like and subscribe it so that you can come on and be a guest and get in on the discussion. And me and Brian, we just love having these kind of conversations anyways, right? Like on our little groups that we're part of, and we have these religious debates and religious discussions. And this is just a way to have, a couple times a week to set aside some time for it, because we live busy lives and we don't get a chance to talk about it or think about it much. And this gives us a chance to do that. It's just really fun. I mean, it's all mental masturbation at the end of the day, but who gives a fuck? Masturbation is great. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys go, man. And we're going to be back on Wednesday at 8 o'clock Central Time. And that's 9 o'clock Eastern Time. So, guys, tune in next week, and we look forward to it.
Appreciate having you guys on. Appreciate y'all calling in. Had
Thanks
a good
for
time.
calling in. Thanks for meeting. Nice
All
to
right,
meet you guys. I think I met Jimmy
thanks.
before, but nice to meet you, Sanford Son, man.
All right, you
Thanks.
guys have a good evening.
Y'all take care.
You too, man. All right, brother. Y'all be good.